Okay, we might go live. Welcome to the additional public hearing for the inquiry into budget estimates 2021-2022. Before I commence, I would like to acknowledge the Gadigal people who are the traditional custodians of this land. I would also like to pay respect to the elders past, present and emerging of the Eora Nation and extend that respect to other Aboriginals present. I welcome Minister Mark Coure and accompanying officials to this hearing. Today the committee will examine the proposed expenditure for portfolios of multiculturalism and seniors. Before we commence, I would like to make some brief comments about procedures for today's hearing. Today's proceedings are being broadcast live from Parliament's website. A transcript will be placed on the committee's website once it becomes available. In accordance with broadcasting guidelines, media representatives are reminded that they must take responsibility for what they publish about the proceedings of the committee. All witnesses in budget estimates have a right to procedural fairness. According to the Procedural Fairness Resolution adopted by the House in 2018, there may be some questions that a witness could only answer if they had more time or with certain documents to hand. In these circumstances, witnesses are advised that they can take a question on notice and provide an answer within 21 days. If witnesses wish to hand up documents, they should do so through the committee staff. Minister, I remind you and the officers accompanying you that you are free to pass notes and refer directly to your advisors sitting behind you at the table behind you. Finally, could everyone please turn their mobile phones to silent for the duration of the hearing? All witnesses will be sworn prior to giving evidence. Minister Coure, I remind you that you do not need to be sworn, as you have already sworn an oath to your office as a Member of Parliament. I also would like to remind the following witnesses that you do not need to be sworn, as you have been sworn at an earlier budget estimates hearing before this committee. Mr Michael Tidball, Mr Joseph Laposta and Ms Tanya Smith. Today's hearing will be conducted from 9:30am till 12:45 with a 15-minute break at 11am. We are joined by the Minister in the morning, and in the afternoon we will hear from the departmental witnesses from 2pm till 5:15pm with a 15-minute break at 3:30. During these sessions there will be questions from opposition and crossbench members only. If required, an additional 15 minutes will be allocated at the end of the morning's and afternoon sessions for government questions. Thank you for your attendance today, and we'll begin with questions from the opposition. We've got everybody sworn, haven't we? Yeah. From the opposition.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome, Minister Coure. I think you've been in for about 10 weeks.
10 weeks, that's right.
Welcome on board, and thank you very much for coming this morning. Minister, I'd just like to raise an issue that I raised at the last budget estimates in November, and that is with regards to COVID-19 multicultural strategy. Has the government implemented the communication strategy to properly inform multicultural communities about the current COVID-19 restrictions and health orders?
Well, thank you for that question, and let me begin also by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands in which we meet today, and of course elders past, present and emerging. Look, in terms of COVID and all things COVID, I want to sort of begin by at least informing of the committee of some of the grants that we've provided in regards to COVID, and I think this is significant and worth of mention, and that is...
I don't want to interrupt. You can talk about grants later on, but I just want to know whether there's a communication strategy in place for COVID-19.
Well, Multicultural New South Wales has done an amazing job in implementing and disseminating COVID information to our community, and it has collaborated with Department of Customer Service, New South Wales Health, for example, on the New South Wales Government's campaign rollout to diverse audiences, multicultural audiences, by engaging with multicultural media, including print, radio, digital, and of course social media. In addition to that, Multicultural New South Wales has translated more than 3,000 resources covering public health information, important public health information, in more than 60 languages since the start of the pandemic. And I'll get my I'll get Mr. Laposta to add to this response in a second, but if I can also add not just Multicultural New South Wales, but through other departments, but they've also worked with SBS, and I do want to acknowledge the wonderful work of SBS in the last 2 years to translate the live daily press conferences during the height of the Delta outbreak. This was the first service of its kind anywhere in Australia, and the community responses was terrific, I have to say. Certainly in my time as a Member of Parliament, a backbencher, the acknowledgements of the wonderful work of SBS had flowed even through to my office as well. More than 2 million views, and I'm sure Mr. Mosselman, you were one of them, across 10 languages. And since June, Multicultural New South Wales and New South Wales Health have conducted a weekly press conference with multicultural media, which has been vital in getting that information,
Thank you, Minister. I mean,
to the community.
I didn't know that Multicultural New South Wales covers SBS as well, but I do thank you.
No, they worked with SBS.
I do thank you for that response. My question is specific, and maybe Mr. Laposta can answer that. And that's I tried at the last occasion. Maybe this time Mr. Laposta can answer. Do we have a communication strategy on for COVID-19 multicultural strategy? Do we have a strategy in place? And if we do we have a document that we can see?
Well, through the Minister, if you're okay with me answering that question directly. Good morning, Mr. Mosselman. As I answered in the last budget estimates hearing, the whole of government communication strategy is led by the Department of Customer Service, which sits under the remit of Minister Dominello. Obviously, we are heavily vested in that because, as you know, 1 in 2 of us was either born overseas or has a parent born overseas, and 1 in 3 of us almost now speaks a language other than English at home. So it was critical that our agency advocated for all of those non-English speaking communities and also those that consume their media sources in potentially traditional forms that aren't things such as online or social media or those sorts of things, but we can engage through newspapers and radio stations and particularly our community radio stations. Now, in terms of a strategy per se, which is I think the essence of your question, and I answered it at the last one, it's very, very determined on and nuanced in terms of what we're facing. So in terms of the work through Delta...
Mr. Laposta, that there's a whole of government strategy. Is that a document that we can see as members of the opposition, members of this committee, to see this whole of government strategy that you speak of?
Mr. Mosselman, I said the whole of government communication is led by the Department of Customer Service.
Right. Is there a document?
That would be a question best directed to Minister Dominello and the Department of Customer Service.
Has the Department of Customer Service given you a document as to how you, as Multicultural New South Wales, should operate?
Well, we speak to the Department of Customer Service depending on what the issues are daily or weekly. We're having, at the moment, I think, meetings 3 or 4 times a week to talk about...
So there's no real documented strategy in place? That's my question.
Well, I think, Mr. Mosselman, I get where you're going with your question. It's very, very determined on what the challenges are that we're facing. So the challenges that we faced during Delta were different from what we faced during Omicron, which are very different right now in terms of what we're facing in the floods. So they need to be nuanced accordingly. If you have a set and forget strategy that's been developed by somebody that doesn't necessarily relate to the specific issues, then my concern would be it wouldn't be appropriately nuanced and targeted to what the need of the day is. So in terms of a whole of government strategy, again, that's a question best directed for Minister Dominello, but certainly through the Minister and our agency, we're very focused on making sure that no multicultural communities aren't communicated to.
All right, I don't get an answer once again. Can I take you to funding multicultural NGOs and community services providers? What are those funding cycles, Minister?
So as I was going to say before in my previous answer, so for example, the New South Wales Government has provided $38.9 million in grant funding to vulnerable communities as part of a $54.7 million package to support vulnerable people in multicultural communities. The grants program over the last little while, for example, has seen, and I can just explain some of those if I can. Obviously, we've seen before the current Delta outbreak, Multicultural New South Wales provided COVID support from June 2020 June 2020, including $6 million to crisis package, was delivered for migrant and settlement NGO services to support temporary visa holders, refugee and asylum seekers. Obviously, there was money set aside for multicultural media as well. There was $1.95 million in COVID-19 community support groups across 2 rounds for grassroots organisations, some in your electorate as well. And in addition to that, of course, there was also funding, for example, emergency relief, NGO support grant programs. There was $5.5 million emergency relief for temporary visa holders as well as a part of a round 2. There was $2 million, as I mentioned before, multicultural media grants. There was $3.4 million empowering and supporting local communities grant program to provide funding for community-led initiatives that support vulnerable cohorts.
The reason of my question is with regards to the NGOs.
I'm still going.
And community service providers. My time is limited.
I think, Shaket, there's plenty of time today. Yeah, I think we should let the minister.
I think this is really. Thank you, Mr. Shoebridge. Look, this is very important, and I think it's worth noting. You know, 10 million for NGO grant, a further 10 million for NGO partnership grant funding program to empower community groups, NGOs to enhance their existing delivery of local services and emergency support during the pandemic, focusing on. But not entirely, but focusing on those 12 LGAs of concern. But obviously, as it went, that became broader throughout Sydney. And of course, there was also, I understand, Multicultural New South Wales was partnering with Department of Communities and Justice on a $4 million grant program for large NGOs to provide support to further multicultural communities. And I saw a lot of this as I was visiting community groups, particularly in southwest and western Sydney, and I do note, of course, the Pacific Council. The Council of Pacific Communities, I should say, that were based in Minto, were able to use this funding to provide wellbeing packs, translation of services, and of course food packs and food hampers for their communities. They did a wonderful job out there in the community, and that's just one of many community groups that I went to. In fact, Mr. Laposta was there as well, because they did a wonderful job in ensuring their community got the help and the service that they needed.
Thank you, Minister. Minister, is there a Multicultural New South Wales funding cycle? Is there a cycle that the Multicultural New South Wales provides funding for various community organisations?
Well, that's an operational matter. I'm here to answer questions on policy, not implementation. So maybe Mr. Laposta might be able to.
Yeah, and the reason for that, my question is to give those community organisations some certainty as to when and how they're going to get their funding and for how long, so that they can provide the services that you want them to provide.
Yeah, well, there's nothing about the last 2 years, Mr. Mossamain, respectfully, that's been normal. So we do have normal rounds of grant funding. We have project grants, which happen every year, which we publicise quite widely through all of our email link and so forth, and we have 2 rounds of festival and events grants. As I just touched on, we've seen extraordinary circumstances the last couple of years. So a lot of those festival and events, we've tried to support the communities by just letting them sort of wait until there's a time where they're safe to run. And likewise with the project grants, there's been sort of no issue that's been brought to my attention where we haven't tried to roll over some of the grant programs, because a lot of them obviously require face-to-face and community engagement, which has been difficult in the last couple of years. So, separate to COVID, and I'm not sure if it's a COVID-related question, but separate to COVID, yes, we have 3 rounds of funding grants each year. And if there's anyone that you're feeling isn't communicated to, please, you know that I'm more than happy to take them on board and reach out to them so that they've got access in there. And a lot of what we're also trying to do in recent times, Mr. Mossamain, is also capacity build within communities. So we don't want to just keep giving the same groups of funding each time because they write good grant applications. We've been spending a considerable amount of time trying to build capacity within some of our new and emerging communities and some of our smaller community groups to make sure that they have this sort of skills and expertise and, certificates of currency and public liability and all of the other things to be able to get government funding as well.
And if I could just add, if Yep, if I can just add through you, Mr Chair, just 2 points. Certainly, a further $15 million in grant funding will be administered to vulnerable communities and multicultural communities experiencing hardship during the Omicron outbreak across 3 grant programs. In addition to that, my agency, Multicultural New South Wales, has been working very, very well with the community, religious groups, not-for-profit sector and other government agencies to identify and assist members of multicultural communities who are struggling, obviously, during this pandemic.
Minister, do you think the annual funding or the every 3 months or 6 months funding to community organisations is sufficient to give them some certainty in their operations?
Well, look, that's a hypothetical. I think that's
no. Mr. Laposta said that there's annual. And there's
as Minister for Multiculturalism and Minister for Seniors as well, I'll do everything I can to ensure that our communities are looked after.
Mr. Laposta, is there certainty in that short-term provision of funding to these organisations that run these programs that provide services to the community?
Mr. Laposta.
Mr. Mossamane, I do think it's difficult for community organisations to get annual funding grants. So and through this minister, and I must admit Minister Coure has been excellent in terms of being an advocate and also having a deep understanding of the needs of a lot of our community organisations and multicultural groups. I would love, Mr. Mossamane, to see more partnership programs where we can multi-year fund as opposed to single-year funding.
I appreciate that response. Minister, I'll take you to the issue of your budget, where there are, as I can see, cutbacks in your budget for 2021, 21, 22 with regards to employee-related budget allocations.
You've got the budget papers there in front of you?
Yes, I do.
What page are they on?
This is the page 7 to 32, Agency Financial Statement 21-22. It's headed by Operating Statement, Multicultural New South Wales. So I'll just read it out to you if you don't have it in front of you, Minister. The budget papers, the employee-related expenses at Multicultural New South Wales are budgeted to reduce from $16.732 million to $15.391 million, a decrease of 1.43 million, or about 8.44%. Is this because you are planning to reduce staffing levels, Minister, or is the government planning to reduce staffing level?
That is an operational matter, but I will speak, if I can, on the budget itself and then pass on to Mr. Laposta, if I can, who will obviously give you a more detailed. But the New South Wales government continues to deliver budget which delivers for the people of New South Wales, including our multicultural communities. And of course, in 2020, to 2021, Multicultural New South Wales overall budget was $38.1 million. In 2021 to 2022, Multicultural New South Wales overall budget is $98.7 million. And I have since been informed that's now increased even further. That is a whopping $60.6 million. And of course, in terms of other additional funding that the department has received over time through obviously the Expenditure Review Committee, that's taken it, as I mentioned before, beyond that $98.7 million mark. What we're seeing here is a considerable increase in Multicultural New South Wales just in the last 2 or 3 years, $60.6 million. In terms of the operational, and to your question, I'll get Mr. Laposta to provide further comment.
Operational in relation to staffing levels.
Specific to our staffing expenses, and Mr. Mossamane, I'm not contesting the statistics that you have in front of you. They're the facts, they're from our annual report, that's fine. I think our agency in the past few years, particularly under the stewardship of myself and the current senior leadership team, has provided a strong and compelling case to ministers, government, premiers and others of the importance of investing in our agency. And the minister just touched on then, I'm incredibly proud that this government's chosen to invest an additional $60 million in our agency. This year, our staffing will increase because of the surge staff that were required to help support the community through COVID. So we will see an increase in our staffing. next year at the moment, and obviously I can't talk to budget and so forth and new policy proposals, but the agency is certainly trying to put the most compelling case it can forward to not reduce our staffing going forward, just because of the importance of all of the relationships that we hold with the community and stakeholders and so forth.
So why the reduction in the employee-related staffing expenses?
This year there was no reduction. So what's happened is you're talking about our, is it 21, 22 or 2021?
No, 21, 22.
Yep. So this year our staffing expenses won't have been reduced because they're in the vicinity of about 18 or 19. I can take the specifics of the question on notice, but we've certainly employed surge staff to help us through the pandemic and also make sure that our existing staff are cared for and supported as well, because it's been an incredibly difficult time, 24/7 around the clock sort of stuff, as you know.
So you will be increasing the number of employees in Multicultural New South Wales. Is that what you said?
Mr. Mossman, that is not a commitment I can make to you, but certainly as the head of the agency, I'll be advocating as fiercely as I possibly can for the appropriate number of resources to continue doing what we're doing. What the other thing I make, Mr. Mossman, it was the point you sort of touched on before. Success of multiculturalism in New South Wales isn't dependent on my agency, it's dependent on a whole of government response. So the critical thing is our ability to be able to cut across and work with other government agencies and influence them. And that's, you know, we've got a shared focus, obviously growing the workforce of Multicultural New South Wales and our critical interpreters and translators and others, and obviously all of our community engagement staff and resilience staff and settlement staff helping support migrant and refugee communities. But equally importantly, it's our capacity to be able to influence the big clusters right across the board to think more you know, through the prism of non-English speaking or barriers to access and services and so forth.
The reason I asked that question, because there is a fear expressed by some that as a result of those cuts, there could be cuts in the number of employees, and that's why I raised it with you. And whether Multicultural New South Wales staffing will be replaced with contractors.
Oh, Mr. Mossman, to the contrary, during my stewardship, and I've now had the privilege of doing this job for just over 3 years and numerous budget estimates committees, but during that time the workforce has only grown, Mr. Mossman, and that's my intention. I never came to Multicultural New South Wales to make cuts. I came to be honest, to make sure that the relevance and the certainty of this agency during this time was never more important than it is right now. So my aspirations are to grow the agency.
How many staff do you have at the moment?
I can take the specifics on notice, but I think this year it's in the vicinity of about 70. Sorry, 70 full-timers and about 1,300 interpreters and translators that are casual.
And those are casual outsourced, casual, or are they paid by?
They're paid by the New South Wales government.
Multicultural New South Wales.
Yep.
I think my time is just finished, so I can hand over.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Minister, nice to see you, and nice to know it's all being recorded. Mr. Laposta, Ms. Tidball.
Congratulations on that Sydney Morning Herald article on Saturday.
Thanks. I don't know if congratulations is
that was
how
a very
I view
good article.
It,
I was very impressed.
Nevertheless, thanks, Minister. Minister, right at this moment, the Ukrainian community and the Ukrainian diaspora in Sydney is really reeling. What additional resources has Multicultural New South Wales delivered to assist them at this moment? And what planning is there in place to deal with what I think will tragically be a surge of Ukrainian refugees?
Look, it's a good question. Thank you very much for this. So what we've done is we've obviously, and you're familiar with probably the STARTS program, which is the New South Wales Service for the Treatment of Rehabilitation of Torture and Trauma Survivors. So obviously that has been expanded to help those communities from Ukraine. As Minister for Multiculturalism, I'm certainly proud, I'm very proud of New South Wales. You know, we're a state that's come from 307 ancestries, you know, speak 215 languages and dialects and follow 148 different religions. Certainly, the New South Wales government has joined with the Ukraine. Firstly, the New South Wales government has joined support for Ukraine around the world by lighting up, obviously, the Sydney Opera House sails blue and yellow recently. New South Wales Premier Dominic Perrottet has joined my many community members to stand with Ukraine. The New South Wales government has taken steps to provide additional support in the form of services and liaising with the Ukraine community, of which I have spoken spoken to many of them on a regular basis. As I said, Multicultural New South Wales has recently funded the New South Wales Service for the Treatment of Torture and Trauma of Services, STARTS, to extend its counselling services to community members impacted by overseas conflicts. And by midday on Monday, 28th of February, recently STARTS had pulled together resources to enable them to start a service for the Ukraine community through the Witness of War program, which my agency funds. And of course, the number of impacted community members are able to call that 1-800 number.
Minister, have you met with STARTS themselves? I mean, I've been to at least 10 of their fundraisers. They never have anywhere near the money they need to provide the level of counselling needed for trauma-impacted refugee community. Have you met with STARTS to find out what additional resources they need?
No, I've not met with STARTS.
Will you meet with them?
What's that?
Will you meet with them?
More than happy to meet with anyone.
No, not anyone. STARTS have been doing this work for 38 years.
More than happy to meet with STARTS.
All right. What was the level of support provided to STARTS last year, and what increase have you provided now?
I understand that's an operational matter, and I'll ask Mr Laposta to answer that if that's possible.
I can get you the specifics within minutes or an hour. Just in terms, I want to be accurate. But I think, Mr Shoebridge, you and I have had the privilege of sitting at some of those STARTS dinners together. During my time, to be able to get an organisation like STARTS and to support them with a stand-up hotline for the Afghan community and now a stand-up hotline for the Ukrainian community with support in language is a considerable advancement from some of the challenges that Jorge and the team were having in terms of securing government funding. And STARTS have also played a critical role for us in supporting asylum seekers and our temporary visa holder cohorts in the last couple of years as well. So there's certainly been an increase in terms of the specifics year on year. I'll get that for you this morning. And
Mr Laposta, have there been requests from STARTS that haven't been able to be funded? And if so, what are they? Not that I'm aware of, but I can take the specifics of that on notice. But there's certainly nothing that I'm aware of. Jorge and I keep pretty open and honest dialogue. He sits as a part of our joint partnership working group that advises myself and Professor Peter Shergold, our Coordinator General of Settlement, in terms of the issues and challenges. And like I said, they've played a critical role in the last couple of years during COVID and now the repatriation of Afghan and Ukrainian citizens. Yep. Minister, what forward planning is there to put in place the support that will be needed, I think tragically, for a surge of Ukrainian refugees?
Well, I think at the moment it's early days, but I have spoken to the Federal Minister for Immigration in regards to this space. Obviously, we have communicated with our federal colleagues in regards to wanting to take over and above our humanitarian cap from Ukraine. I read today in the Herald there were 2.6 million...
Correct.
What's that?
Correct, 2.6 million refugees. 2.6 million refugees, 150,000 of those each day.
I mean, what is happening in Ukraine is horrific, and as Minister for Multiculturalism, I will do everything I can to help the Ukraine community, both here and overseas.
And have you met with the leaders from the Ukrainian community to start doing that advanced planning, to hear directly from them what their needs are?
I spoke to and I've met with religious leaders and, of course, members of the Ukraine Council, many of which turned up to the Harmony dinner 2 weeks ago. Again, as I said before, I will do everything I can to help the Ukraine community.
But have you organised a sit-down, distinct meeting with Ukrainian leaders, the Ukrainian community reps? Have you organised a distinct meeting with them as apart from, and I'm not dismissing meeting them in broader context. Sure. Have you organised that?
Well, I have had a meeting with some of our religious leaders and community leaders. I do note that the chair of the Ukraine Community Council had COVID recently, but I look forward to meeting them very soon together. I'll pass you on to Mr Laposta, who could probably add to that response.
Thanks, Minister. Mr Shoebridge, We don't just want to meet with people for the sake of meeting is the first thing I'd say, because settlement ultimately and supporting our refugee communities is a matter for the Commonwealth. And so what we've done is we've made sure that Professor Peter Shergold has met with people like Paris Aristotle and others that are working on behalf of the Commonwealth to meet with Ukrainian leaders and then to advise the Minister and myself and others on policy. What I would say, and something that I am incredibly proud of, is within days of this, New South Wales Government through our Premier Dominic Perrottet took a leadership position to the Commonwealth on the importance of settling people and was willing to do obviously our fair share and more. So to have a state that is in that position, from my point of view, is a significant policy advancement from some of the challenges that I've had historically in my role.
Indeed, having states be willing part of the solution rather than part of the problem. But what I'm exploring here is, apart from the statement, what actually has happened in the terms of forward planning.
Yep.
Has there been a meeting with the Ukrainian Council of New South Wales?
Yes.
Has the Minister met with the Ukrainian Council of New South Wales?
Yes, he has. Yes, he has. But with respect to settlement, I just need to be very clear here. We work very closely with the Commonwealth through a forum or a mechanism called the SOSOG, which is the Senior Officials of Settlement Planning Committee. We had a conversation and a meeting with them last week, which myself, one of my senior directors, and also Professor Peter Shergold attended. In terms of, we asked for clarity around the numbers of Ukrainian citizens that were looking to settle here. Australia is a long, long way away from Ukraine. We also wanted clarity around visa categories. We wanted clarity around things like Medicare support, access to healthcare, access to services, employment support, all of those different things. We haven't yet had that clarity from the Commonwealth yet. So it's very difficult for us, whilst we need to listen to the community, it's very difficult for us to go into meetings when we aren't equipped with that information to be able to actually practically and tangibly support them, which is different from the Afghan situation because we did have that clarity and we were able to move with leaders.
Have you, in those meetings, been an advocate for Ukrainian refugees having those rights, access to Medicare, the right to work, so as they can contribute?
Yes, Mr Shivridge.
Could you provide on notice?
Because otherwise the costs sit with the state and that's not in our interest.
And we see that on many occasions with really unfair...
asylum seekers and others as well.
Unfair restrictions on asylum seekers. Could you provide on notice what questions, what information you sought from the Commonwealth and what, if any, answers you have?
I can.
Minister, I'm sure, like me, you've met with many other communities in the last few weeks and many of them who have suffered ongoing structural violence in their homelands, whether it's the Sudanese community or the Kurdish community or other groups like the Afghani community. They are immensely empathetic with the people of Ukraine. They welcome the calls for boycotts and sanctions and the opening of the removal of restrictions for refugees. But they are also saying, what about us? Have we been forgotten? Are we going to be put to the back of the queue? There's a very real anxiety in those communities that they're going to be forgotten. What do you say to those communities, the Sudanese, the Kurdish, Afghanis, Myanmar? What do you say to those communities right now?
Well, firstly, you are aware, of course, of the Premier's letter to the Prime Minister 3 weeks ago that the Ukrainian number of refugees is over and above the cap. And of course, I have also spoken to Mr Hawke, who's the Minister for Multiculturalism and Citizenship, and also told him of the same thing.
But they've seen the practice of what happened previously with refugee intake for Afghanis fleeing the violence and terror, where it came at the expense of other refugee communities. You can understand their concern, can't you, Minister?
I certainly can. Yep.
Will you be meeting with those communities, telling them of your advocacy and making it clear that the New South Wales Government's position is, yes, of course, we all want to reach out and help the Ukrainian community, but it must not be at the expense of other communities around the world who also desperately need our help and protection?
Look, myself and Mr Laposta has met with many multicultural leaders on a regular basis. In fact, you're probably aware that every week I have a multicultural, at the moment it's a Zoom, hopefully it's face-to-face, every week with both multicultural media and independently to that multicultural community groups and religious leaders every week without fail. And that enables me, obviously, to pass on any issues or concerns that they have onto relevant government departments, Mr Laposta, etc. But I will do everything I can to help our communities right across New South Wales, including those that have just arrived.
All right, on a help one, help all basis, not on taking from one and giving to another,
No.
which we saw with the federal government's response to the Afghan refugee crisis.
Correct.
All right. If you could provide any table, any documents you have about making these representations to the Commonwealth in writing, any representations you've made to the federal minister in writing to this effect, are there any?
We'll come back to you.
Minister, my office has received disturbing reports that certain trucks which are owned by the members of the broader Sikh community in New South Wales and who can be quite visible on the streets and identified on the streets of Sydney, have been the subject of sabotage, having brake lines cut and having other safety measures in their trucks being actively sabotaged. Have you heard of any of these concerns?
Not that I'm aware of, but I'm more than happy to report back to this committee unless Mr Laposta would like to add to my response.
Well, I might ask Mr Laposta.
Mr Shoebridge, when were you made aware of these concerns?
In the last few days, and I'm seeking some further detail about it,
Yeah.
that deeply troubled me.
Yeah.
And as the additional detail comes to hand, I will provide it across.
But please do, because, and I don't need to tell you this, and potentially this is where some of the conversation may be going today.
There may well be other ministers and agencies responsible, including those who wear blue.
Well, no, they've got a really important role to play. There's no ifs or buts about it. And I met with one of the senior leaders of the Sikh community on Friday to wish them well, seeing when I was up in the North Coast the other day, I saw one of their vans driving up to provide food, and I went in there the other day just to wish them well with all of their pallets and things, and the matter wasn't raised with me, but I take that incredibly seriously. All of our community should feel safe in Australia, and that is a criminal act, if correct. So please escalate it to my office, and we'll work as quickly and as closely as we can with law enforcement agencies and others.
And Minister,
If I can just...
I am seeking as much detail as I can. These were very real concerns, though, that were conveyed to my office. Will you meet with the community face-to-face to discuss these concerns? You can imagine their concern.
I certainly will meet with them face-to-face, and I'm more than happy to work with you on these issues, as I have spoken to many, both in the Greens and other political parties, both in the lower house and some in the upper house as well. I'm more than happy to work with you on this issue. This is a very serious issue, and I'm more than happy to either have this conversation immediately after this budget estimates meeting.
And Minister, no, and I welcome that approach, and in fact, I wouldn't have expected any different.
Thank you.
Speaking about Turbans for Australia, who are right now at the moment up in Lismore, having taken food aid and assistance, provided their own trucks and their own transport and their own distribution facilities up there.
Yeah.
They have also been providing that extraordinary service for the last 2 years to much needed parts of the community in Western Sydney. Mm-hmm. And we've seen that organisation respond around the country in moments of disaster. Yet their primary grant application with Multicultural New South Wales was not successful. Can you explain why?
That's a question to me.
Yes.
Look, firstly, I've met with Turbans for Australia. I've been to many of their events. In terms of their grants, I believe I'll probably take that on notice if I can.
Yeah, you see, Minister, I think they like politicians coming to their events and supporting their work. They welcome that. But what they really need is financial support because they're doing work that nobody else is doing. And I think we all appreciate and celebrate their work they're doing. But when they ask for funding, they keep getting knocked back. They get very small, tiny grant, but their primary funding application is rejected.
Their last event that I attended, sorry to cut you off, their last event that I attended at Western Sydney, in fact, Rydalmere, I think it was, from memory. I do know for a fact, from memory, from that brief, there was grants that they were successful with, but I will take that on notice. They do an outstanding job in our community. Turbans for Australia, in fact, the chair of that organisation was awarded Parramatta Citizen of the Year.
Well, yeah, and we'll put his name on the record, Amar Singh, and the extraordinary work he and his team do. But what they're asking for is structural financial support from the government. And I suppose, did you say you'll come back on notice about that, or you'll provide some additional...
We'll provide some further additional information in terms of the grants that they were successful with over the last few years and any other relevant information.
All right. I think that's my questions.
Anthony?
Thank you. Thank you, Chair, and welcome, Minister. Minister, can I just clarify your role as Minister for Seniors? Is it fair to say that your role is to be an advocate for seniors in the Cabinet and make sure their interests are being considered? A fair summation of
that is a fair estimation. As Minister for Seniors, my priority is to ensure seniors across New South Wales are safe, have access to the best possible services and are able to live happy and fulfilling and healthy lives.
Oh, okay. Let's have a go.
Minister, can you tell us what short-term relief the New South Wales Government has delivered for older residents of New South Wales, particularly those in the north of the state who've been affected by floods, to ensure supplies of medication and access to medical treatment is maintained during the current crisis?
Well, Resilience New South Wales is the lead agency for the disaster recovery and management. First and foremost, my heartfelt condolences. Can I just pause that there? Mr Shoebridge, we'll talk offline about that issue. I think that's very good. Yeah. And obviously, first and foremost, my heartfelt condolences go out to anyone who has had family members lost their life during a very difficult time in these floods, as you mentioned. And 3 years with bushfires, COVID-19 now with floods have been incredibly challenging, and the fact is not lost on me. Our agencies have already begun collaborating with DCJ, and DCJ has currently seconded a number of staff to Resilient New South Wales to work on evacuation centres in affected areas. In regards to disaster welfare assistance, more than 240 DCJ staff are currently involved in providing disaster welfare assistance to support communities across the state impacted by floods. In regards to vulnerable people, the Department of Communities and Justice, on behalf of Resilience New South Wales, are providing emergency accommodation to any person displaced by floods. And as of 7th of March 2022, there have been 913 disaster-affected people assisted emergency accommodation due to the recent floods, with 582 people currently in accommodation. And I've been in contact with affected MPs and their officers, both Janelle Saffron, Tamara Smith, Jeff Provis, Robin Preston, just to name a few. And I've also spoken and received advice from the MACA members, the Ministerial Ageing Council, Advisory Council, Roy Starkey, who lives in Lismore as well. And I might throw you onto the Secretary, who might add to my response.
Thank you. Just in relation to the website that's been established for the purpose of the floods, and specifically in relation to your question, I believe, about telehealth and prescriptions, it is a first port of call for advice on a number of things, including telehealth and prescriptions, but also covers financial assistance, emotional and trauma support after a flood, and these are specifically targeted to seniors, flood and storm advice in community languages, emergency legal and insurance support, emergency help for homeowners in a flood, landlords and tenants' rights in a flood, and in relation to telehealth and prescriptions, it does deal with support to access ongoing healthcare and medicines. In terms of the specifics of that, I would be very happy to take that on notice and report back quickly.
Thank you. Can I turn again to the floods? Obviously, the floods have caused an already acute rental shortage on the north coast has become much worse. That has a particular bearing on our senior residents. Can you perhaps advise what advocacy you've undertaken, Minister, in relation to taking steps to try and address this rental shortage for seniors?
Look, I have reached out personally to the Minister, Stephanie Cook, along with appropriate ministers in regards to this space. We stand ready to help in any way we can. In addition to what the Secretary has added, if I can also say that DCJ staff were deployed to assist frontline support at evacuation centres, disaster welfare access points, administering emergency accommodation and providing administrative and coordinated support to those on the front line. I'm in weekly, if not in some cases daily, contact with members of Parliament up there, and I have offered my support to the likes of Janelle Safran and Tamara Smith and Jeff Provis, Robin Preston, for example, Chris Kalaptis, even Catherine Cusack in the upper house, offering anything I can do to help those communities. DCJ Housing is continuing to actively source any available accommodation in flood-impacted areas surrounding its towns to use for emergency accommodation. And of course, the department is liaising very closely with New South Wales Land and Housing Corporation property assessors to ensure that public housing dwellings occupied by seniors are inspected for damage and required to repairs as a priority. And as Minister for Seniors, I will do everything I can to make sure it is a priority. And the purpose of this is to ensure that tenants have necessary supports in place to assess any further needs that may need to be met to ensure tenants are safe in their home. And as I mentioned before, I've already spoken through to members of my Ministerial Advisory Council who live in Lismore, who is on the ground providing me up-to-date information about the situation on the ground. Furthermore, I've called... we'll get to that in a sec. Yeah, I'll answer that. Furthermore, I've called a number of peak bodies to keep an open line of communication during this extremely difficult time. And a number of these bodies have also written to me directly, and I've instructed my staff to action these immediately to the relevant ministers and to follow these up. These have included representations to Minister for Planning, Minister Roberts, and of course Minister McLaren-Jones and Minister Farraway.
So you are going to elaborate on what your members of the Advisory Council in Lismore are telling you. What specifically have you been?
Well, look, let's not beat around the bush here. I mean, this is a significant problem for Lismore. And of course, my agency, both DCJ and in fact, Multicultural New South Wales, is doing everything we can to get people back in their homes or to find alternative accommodation as quickly as possible.
Minister, obviously, extreme weather seems to be the order of the day now. Had many natural disasters in the past few years. What is your government doing to ensure that older residents of the state are not negatively impacted by the effects of climate change, including things like heat stress, given the number of natural disasters we're experiencing?
Well, look, I guessed actually, sir, that you would ask me that question. That is probably more directed to the Minister for the Environment, James Griffin, who's doing a remarkable job as Minister for the Environment.
But obviously, Minister, there are acute impacts on older residents, given, you know, their vulnerability. What advocacy have you undertaken in relation to making sure that we are addressing the impacts of climate change?
Look, it's a significant issue, and certainly I'm working with, as Minister for Seniors, Minister for Multiculturalism, I'll be working across government and through government departments and agencies to ensure that that our seniors across New South Wales are safe.
Perhaps you might be able to tell us about the consultative strategies that you're adopting around addressing the needs of older Australians arising out of the floods.
I'll take that on notice if I can.
You're not aware of what consultation you're engaging in?
I might throw you to our director to answer that.
Excuse me. I believe the Minister had answered that when he talked about engaging with each of the peak agencies regarding issues related to the floods. Also the Ministerial Advisory Council on Ageing, and in particular member Roy Starkey, who is a member of the Lismore community. The Minister also meets monthly with the seniors and also carers peaks. That meeting also includes the Ageing and Disability Commissioner and the Chair of the Ministerial Advisory Council, Catherine Greiner. So they're the formal governance processes set up, but as the Minister just discussed, he'd been speaking with those peak agencies and MACA members more frequently.
If I can also just add to that response, and you would have seen the media on this, so over the last few weeks. I mean, obviously, you know, we've established a community recovery centre to help flood-impacted residents find support, financial assistance, and of course information available. We've also waived the waste levy for over 10 flood-affected LGAs, and of course my department, as I mentioned before, is already working very closely with New South Wales Land and Housing Corporation property assessors to ensure public housing dwellings occupied by seniors are inspected for damage and required repairs as a priority. And as the Director had mentioned already, I have been in regular contact with members of MACA on a regular basis, particularly Roy Starkey, who lives in Lismore, who's able to tell me on the ground how bad the situation is. Furthermore, I've called a number of our peak bodies to keep an open line of communication during this extremely difficult time. And I've reached out, of course, as I mentioned, on 2 separate occasions to all of the members of Parliament up there, right across the political divide, and offered any support. Offered support to them and to their communities, and mentioned on more than a couple of occasions that my office, department and agency stand ready to help.
Thank you, Minister. Ms. Smith, I want to ask you just in terms of the structure of the seniors portfolio. So you're the Director of Women New South Wales and Ageing and Carers. How is the seniors element of the portfolio structured within the department? What kind of resources are allocated to this part of the portfolio?
Thank you. I'm responsible for the policy team that implements the seniors strategy, so the Ageing Well in New South Wales. There's additional resources that work on seniors in our events and comms team, and there's also a card operations team that manages both the seniors card and the New South Wales companion card.
How many staff are we talking about in total would have responsibilities, exclusive responsibilities, within the seniors portfolio?
It's a little bit difficult to split that up. In terms of the policy team, there's 6 FTE. Regarding communication and events, that team's quite blended to work across a range of inclusion portfolios. And the seniors card and companion cards team, again, they're interchangeable across those 2 programs, and also provide support to tech-savvy seniors.
I see. So there's not a clear delineation of functions allocated to the seniors portfolio?
Just for the seniors strategy.
Just the senior strategy. 6 FTE is effectively the allocation
Correct,
Right.
correct.
And so is there a discrete budget allocation for seniors within the portfolio? How is it actually resourced?
Yes, so there is a discrete budget for those activities under the strategy, but looking at the first action plan of the Ageing Well strategy, it's clear that the majority of those actions, so there's 90 actions under the Ageing Well action plan, are delivered by other agencies and the budget
departments.
and the budgets associated with those activities don't pass through the seniors team in DCJ.
Right, I see. Minister, can you update us on a commitment made in 2019 about increasing the number of aged crime prevention officers? Where are we up to in terms of the rollout of that commitment?
I might take that question on notice at this stage and report back if that's possible. Just give me 1 second.
I'm happy for you to come back later in the session if that's a possibility, Minister. Is that...
I'll report back if I can.
Okay.
In the session, that's right.
So, can I ask about the relationship with the Age and Disability Commission? So, it's got a role in terms of investigations of elder abuse. Are you able to advise how many staff are dedicated to those investigations? Perhaps this is something that Ms Smith might be able to advise on.
I'll ask Ms Smith to advise if that's possible, but if I can just add, yes, obviously the Commissioner, Robert Fitzgerald, who we recently appointed, I had the pleasure of meeting, was appointed Commissioner July 2019. Obviously you're right about the functions of the Commissioner, and I'll turn to the Director, Ms Smythe, in terms of adding any further to that comment.
The Ageing, Disability and Disability Commissioner is a statutory independent appointment. So questions regarding staffing will need to be redirected to the Commissioner. The Commissioner produced an annual report for 2020-21 and there is some detail in that, and that report was presented to Parliament.
The Commissioner's second annual report, just to add to that if I can, was tabled in Parliament on the 26th of October 2021. So all that information that Ms Smythe was, had just mentioned is outlined in that report. It is a statutory independent appointment, and so questions obviously relating to internal budget decisions should be directed straight to the Commissioner.
Okay, thank you. Minister, I want to ask about the New South Wales Steering Committee for the Prevention of Elder Abuse. Has there been a meeting of that this year, or while you've been the responsible minister?
Let me just triple check on that, if I can.
Ms Smith, you might be able to tell us, did this committee meet in the 2020-2021 period?
There is a steering committee, multiple working groups that I am involved in with other jurisdictions in the Commonwealth, and yes, they have met multiple times in the last financial year.
Are you able to provide details, I mean, on notice of the dates that it met?
No problem.
And
We can supply that after. We'll take that on notice.
And what about, so can you also provide it for the 2019-2020 period as well?
We can.
We can take that on notice as well.
Minister, are you able to advise us on where we're up to in terms of addressing the needs of elder New South Wales residents in relation to social housing?
In regards to social housing, just give me a second. Well, I can provide, obviously through the Ageing Well New South Wales Senior Strategy of 2021-2031, living in age-friendly environments is a focus of this new strategy, and I'm sure you've read this strategy, undertaken under the strategy, the government is working towards increasing housing options for older people that are age appropriate, affordable, accessible, close to transport, recreation, and of course community services. As part of this 10-year strategy, the Future Directions of Social Housing in New South Wales strategy is the biggest social housing build program of any state or territory across the country. And what we're seeing under the program, the Community Plus program, which has delivered 23,000 social housing, 500 affordable housing, part of 40,000 private dwellings over 10 years, is also the 1.1 billion social affordable housing fund, which is also delivering social affordable housing dwellings throughout New South Wales over a 4-year period. In addition to that, we also saw, and this is probably a follow-up question, if I could predict that, we've also seen included in that 34 million funding to prevent people from experiencing homelessness. So 14 million for emergency accommodation to enable people to self-isolate, 20 million for rental subsidies to enable people to access and sustain private rental accommodation during this challenging time. And this, of course, includes a little over 6 million for rent choice, Start Safely, and a 10.5 million for rent choice. Throughout 2021, there was a further 20 million in funding for rent choice, and certainly we're addressing the housing needs right across New South Wales. And my priority is to ensure seniors have safe, secure housing that meets their needs.
I think my time has expired, so I'll hand back to the Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Now I know why Mr. Schubert said I've got plenty of time. Their member's not here, so I'll ask. You can take your time now, Mr. Minister. I'll ask you some questions. With regards to your predecessor, Ms. Natalie Ward, she had said that she supported maintaining, interpreting and translating services within Multicultural New South Wales. Is there a danger of losing the interpreting, translating services within Multicultural New South Wales, Minister?
Well, that's an operational matter, and I'll turn to Joseph Laposta.
I hope not. The reality of the situation is, Mr. Mosamain, that probably about 15 years ago, private providers started to move into that space. And at the time that the government services such as ours, and we're quite unique in a sense because we're one of the few that's actually, and it comes to your question before, which was really pertinent, are they employed by the New South Wales government? And the answer in our instance is they are. And so with that obviously comes entitlements and rights and protections by being a New South Wales government employee, and in my opinion, as they should. The challenge is we're competing with private providers that it's fundamentally about turning a profit as opposed to necessarily doing the things that we need to make sure that there's a sustainability of languages. And even in the Greek community right now, there's some challenges as that community and the demographics get older that we need to invest in the next crop of Greek Australian interpreters in that space. So that's probably the long-winded answer of saying my intention is absolutely not on my watch to see that service fail, and that's why it was so important that we undertook that industrial action and worked with the Public Service Association to get the reform in the legislation for interpreters and translators last year. You know, and you touched on Minister Ward, and I think that was from her predecessor, Minister Lee, that was able to sort of see that process through to a point where the union didn't object on the changes that were proposed. Yep. And my intention now is really proudly to grow that service, and I'm going to work incredibly hard with Secretary Tidball and all the secretaries right across the government to try and create the most compelling case we can for them to use Multicultural New South Wales interpreters and translators and try and, regain the market share wherever possible.
Because interpreting and translating is really the core project of Multicultural New South Wales. It's a core service.
It's one of the core services. So is our policy, so is our advocacy, so is building capacity and capability within our communities, settlement, to the examples Mr. Shoebridge used before. So it is very important. It's one of probably the 3 or 4 most important pillars, and that's why it's called out as our first strategic priority in our 21-25.
And it's such an important role. Sorry to cut you off there.
No,
it's such an important role for Multicultural New South Wales, and we saw a million examples of that, obviously, during the pandemic over the last 2 years. The vital service of translating, working in with government departments, New South Wales Health, other agencies, in translating, interpreting that really important information, that health advice, to your Arabic communities, to the Chinese communities, right throughout, and not just those 2 communities, but many others, right throughout New South Wales. And, I said before, translating in 60 different languages, over 3,000, I think we're now up to 6,000 bits of material. I mean, it's such an important tool that right across New South Wales that they performed. And I do want to thank, we thank, and I acknowledged our frontline staff earlier today in health and education, police, emergency services. I also want to thank the staff that translated all of that material, because it was vital. It was absolutely critical and vital. And you and I have walked the same streets and the same roads and visited the same community groups. Those community groups did a wonderful job in getting that material, once translated, to send out to their own members. And they played such a vital role for that because it was very, very hard to get into those community groups.
I couldn't agree more with you there, Minister. But as you've heard with Mr. Laposta, and you say it's an operational, but really it's a policy position of the government whether to privatise or outsource or not to outsource. So it's a policy position. So can you guarantee, Minister, that it will not be outsourced or privatised under your watch?
Well, what I can guarantee is that translation service will always be there in Multicultural New South Wales under this government. And they have performed a remarkable job in not just interpreting, media releases and other important government information, but face-to-face video, telephone. There are many modes of interpreting and translating right across government, in every government department. And it is an important, significant partnership these guys have with Service New South Wales to provide that translation through bookings, for example, for clients, through many of the 100+ shopfront locations, considerably looking at helping those that need that. And police, courts, for example, and there are examples of that as well. Certainly in my remit as Minister for Multiculturalism, translation services will be front and centre right across government.
You touched on courts there, Minister. What funding is the government providing the New South Wales courts and police for this purpose?
Well, the Attorney-General is up on Wednesday. You can ask him that question then.
I will, but in the meantime, you've raised the fact that the translating services provided to courts and police. What funding? Perhaps if you either take that on notice, or Mr. Laposta can answer that question.
We'll probably take that on notice.
Okay. And what funding is the government providing multicultural language service to provide interpreting and translating services to other government agencies? Is there a breakdown, Mr. Laposta, of what service provision you have with health, for example, education, roads, and other services?
I'll throw to Mr. Laposta, who will have a detailed explanation.
It's a very good question.
Well, thank you.
We just need to be careful because we're in an open tendering market, Mr. Mossamane. So
sure. You don't have to
business
give
and
me
the
statistics.
merits, but the business and the merits of our language services agency has to stack up for itself in terms of quality and price and others, and it needs to be independent and separate from the policy-related work that you're talking about at the moment. So that's why our teams are quite separate in a sense. The Language Services Division has to make a dollar for itself, and then any dollar that we make gets reinvested back into, say, the scholarship programs and other sorts of things that we do to help support new and emerging communities. That's quite a different role from our policy team that needs to work with some of the other government agencies that you're talking about, and does, to make sure that when we're communicating material during crises, or when we're making changes to transport routes or these sorts of things, that they're considered, and that we're not just thinking through the prism of English-speaking networkers or community members or participants, but we're thinking through all of the other different communities that need to be considered as a part of any change. So our policy team does work specifically on language, and right now we're doing extensive work with the Department of Education to think about the role of language in schools and all of those things, but it is quite separate from our Language Services Division.
But is there a specific funding for those services to other government agencies that you have under Multicultural New South Wales?
We don't fund other government agencies to do interpreting and translating. That's the first thing. They need to have a budget per se that's set out.
Right, that's their budgets using
And so
your
the government
services.
requires, under one of its mechanisms, and I can get the specifics of it on notice, but a minimum of 6% of all government necessary advertising spend needs to be spent on multicultural communities as a minimum as well. And so really pleasingly, and under the stewardship of the Department of Customer Service and Minister Dominello and Minister Coure and others in recent times, particularly during the pandemic, we've seen that shift up to about 11 or 12%, which is pleasing, because that's what the Minister was touching on before. That's what's helped us unlock all of the community radio stations and local print and all of the others to be able to make sure they get all the COVID-related material.
And
Minister?
I was just going to add, certainly
Yes.
my role as Minister for Multiculturalism, as I mentioned before, and you would have heard, we have weekly meetings with multicultural media, and community groups and religious leaders on separate Zooms to ensure that that information is passed through to them as well, because they are at the end of the day doing a wonderful job. As you know, you've got your own multicultural awards, I think, from memory, which I've attended.
And the previous Premier took it over and made it the Premier's Multicultural Media Awards. So
Well,
I'm
success has a million fathers.
Yes. Minister, just following up on what Mr. Laposte has stated with regards to other agencies using, for interpreting, translating services, using Multicultural New South Wales, is there a danger of those other agencies then going out to tender and using outside sources as opposed to Multicultural New South Wales?
I might throw to Mr. Laposte on that if I can.
Yes.
There is a danger.
Yeah, there is.
And what is Multicultural New South Wales doing about it?
Well, the first thing we did was transform an award that took me 2.5 years to modify so that we could be cost competitive with the private providers, is the first thing. And again, I want to acknowledge the contribution and input of the Public Service Association to get to a point where they didn't object to that award. And it took, significant, robust conversations to get to a point where we're all pretty comfortable and everyone gave a little bit. So now that that award's been modified, whilst we still pay a little bit more, I'll back the quality and the experience and the brand of the New South Wales government to be able to go in and get the work that we need to. But as you know, as everyone knows, it's a free and open market. We can't manipulate or require other government agencies to use our agency. We have to put our best foot forward and compete with those private providers. And that's the focus of that very dedicated team, which has now grown to being about 25, which is one of the areas we have invested in with our headcount growth, is to be able to create the most compelling and strong argument to be able to get more business from Service New South Wales, more business from transport, more business from health, more business from all of the other departments, to be able to grow our workforce, to grow job creation opportunities within Multicultural New South Wales for our interpreters and translators, and ultimately whatever funds we can make, we can then reinvest back into scholarship programs, diploma programs and other things to grow the next wave or generation of interpreters and translators.
But the pressure is on you at the moment to...
Can I just jump in?
Yeah, sure.
Mr. Can I clarify something there? Are you saying it's not possible for the New South Wales government to mandate that agencies use your translation service?
I'm happy to take the legalities of that question on notice, Mr. Diadam, but the advice that I've been given to date is no, it is not possible to mandate them to use us. I'd be certainly happy if that was the case, but the advice that we've been given to date. So I can take the specifics of that on notice, but my understanding at this stage is no.
What's the Minister's view? Yeah, Minister.
Is that something that you would be prepared to take forward as an option for a whole of government position that excellent translation service
firstly,
by New South Wales be mandated across government?
Well, firstly, it is an excellent translating service, and they've done a wonderful job, particularly in the last 2 years during this pandemic. It is a question that I will take on notice, but I'll do everything that I can to help our multicultural communities right across New South Wales.
Minister, just continuing on that point, when competing with cheapest outside providers, are we lowering the potential quality of services that Multicultural New South Wales interpreters and translators can provide?
Again, I'll take that on notice, that question, in terms of translating services. I mean, it's...
Mr. LaPosta, isn't it clear that if we are competing with cheap quality providers in terms of interpreting and translating, then we are then providing, to be able to compete, we will have to then employ or pay cheap interpreters and translators. Wouldn't that be the case?
Can I just add to that, and I'll get obviously Mr. LaPosta to add to my comment in a second, but I mean Multicultural New South Wales has done an excellent job in terms of launching a telephone interpreting service a few years back, expanding the options available through Multicultural New South Wales for remote interpreting. This has enabled interpreting to deliver, as I said before, face-to-face video, telephone of course, and telephone interpreting is particularly relevant for people living in regional New South Wales. And they have formed a significant partnership with Service New South Wales already, and you would get the multicultural toolkits on a regular basis that either my office sends out, Multicultural New South Wales sends out, and we also send that out to councils as well in terms of recent translation of important government messaging. But these guys, Multicultural New South Wales, I should say, has formed that significant partnership to provide that translation bookings to help those Service New South Wales centres right throughout New South Wales. In addition to that, the Language Services Forum meets quarterly, and their next meeting is next week. They've done, I think, a really good job right across government ensuring that, Multicultural New South Wales recruit interpreters representing more than 100 different languages, and I think Mr. LaPosta may want to add to that.
Sorry, Mr. Mosman, what was the specifics of your question?
The specifics of my question was that you've indicated earlier that you may go into the public tender and compete with cheap outside providers. Wouldn't that lower the quality of the service that Multicultural New South Wales would then provide?
Yeah, I don't want to throw the rest of the service under the bus by calling them cheap in terms of their quality. I think from a pricing point of view,
if you do compete with that
I think, to be fair, that sort of does it sounds like a bit of a hypothetical.
But it's a hypothetical based on a potential that once the service is then out-tendered, then it's real, isn't it, Minister?
I don't know the basis of what you're trying to get at, unfortunately.
You've just given me an answer before with regards to the quality of the service.
We've sort of answered the question.
Go ahead. Yeah.
A few different times.
Yeah, go ahead. Let's go.
Chair? Great, thank you. Good morning, Minister, and good morning to all of the officials.
Good morning, Ms. Boyd.
Good to see you. I understand you've already answered some questions around your role as Minister for Seniors and what that involves. What do you see as your role in relation to aged care, given that it is funded federally, but there is obviously a part for state government to play?
Well, as I mentioned, in fact, earlier today, when we got our rapid antigen test, look, while the Commonwealth Government is primarily responsible for aged care policy, certainly in my role as Minister for Seniors is to ensure that seniors are safe, have access to the best possible services, are able to live a happy, fulfilling and healthy life. And that's something that I have, in fact, mentioned to you earlier today.
And when it comes to, for example, decisions by your government to relax COVID restrictions or take other measures that disproportionately impact on older people, do you see your role as advocating to, I guess, step in to any gaps that are left by the federal government?
Well, firstly, the nature of your question. I do want to extend my sincere condolences to those who have lost loved ones during the COVID-19 outbreaks. And I do want to publicly say that I thank our nurses, our aged care workers and other frontline workers who have been at the forefront protecting seniors right across New South Wales. And I did mention to you earlier today about the situation in aged care that I hear a lot with my own mother-in-law who's in aged care facility at the moment. While, as I said before, the Commonwealth Government is primarily responsible for the aged care policy, I do understand that Minister Hazzard has asked each local area health district to reach out to their respective aged care nursing home facility provider to ensure that there is an open line of communication, and I think that's really important should they require any assistance. Aged care providers are, at the end of the day, responsible for managing the outbreaks in their facilities, and the Commonwealth Government leads many aspects of the outbreak management, as you and I have spoken about before, as they are fully funded and regulatory responsibility for the aged care sector. But however, New South Wales Health has and continues to play an important role in supporting aged care providers to manage those outbreaks and setting public health measures. And certainly at the request of the Commonwealth, New South Wales Health has supplied more than 2 million PPE items to assist over 100 residential aged care facilities experiencing those outbreaks and supply shortages since the Omicron outbreak.
So to summarise then, from what I'm hearing, you do think that there is a role for state government to play in filling the gaps that are that could be left by federal government?
Look, working together to ensure that seniors right across New South Wales, particularly those in aged care, are safe. And as I said to you earlier today, I've personally spoken to the Federal Minister for Seniors Australia's Aged Care Services, Richard Colbeck, to make it clear my door is always open.
Thank you. I understand that the Ageing and Disability Commission has seen an extraordinary rate of contact through their abuse helpline since they were established, which is as you would expect. The commission was established, it was advertised, bit of word of mouth. As that becomes available, more and more people are reaching out in order to access those services. Has consideration been given to allocating funding to the commission based on the demand they experience so that they can ensure that none of those contacts goes unanswered?
Well, that's a very good question. Obviously, as you know, we established the Ageing and Disability Commission to safeguard the rights of older people and adults with a disability living either in their home or within the community. Robert Fitzgerald AM, I don't know if you were here for that, but he was appointed in 2019. There is a helpline, you're absolutely right. And of course, I condemn all abuse, neglect and exploitation or in any form. In regards to the other part of your question, the second part I might throw to our Director or...
Yep, sure. So currently the Ageing and Disability Commission is funded $13.9 million over 4 years and $6.89 million in 2021. Some of that funding did exist in the New South Wales Elder Abuse Helpline and Resource Unit, and that function transferred over to the Ageing and Disability Commission. There was an increase of calls following when we came out of lockdown, and the report, the annual report, estimated that or indicated that possibly that was people being able to see older people and people with disability again and identify issues that had arisen during that lockdown period, or also that lockdown period provided an opportunity for people to perpetrate abuse.
I understand that the number of calls to the helpline, to their abuse helpline, was 25% higher in 2020-21 versus 2019-20. We did have COVID lockdowns during both of those financial years. Isn't it the case that we are going to continue, as the service gets better at responding and people become more aware of the service and their reporting options, that we will see more and more demand? Isn't there a need for an increase in funding?
Look, certainly as my role as Minister for Seniors, I will keep monitoring that. You are absolutely right. There was an increase, but of course that was over the last year because of the pandemic. We'll continue monitoring this, and we'll do everything we can to ensure that that gets the necessary attention and resources it deserves.
Thank you. I may pick up.
And I think
Can I just add
Please
to
do.
that? There is always an issue and forecast with these things. I am relatively new to my role, but I know Robert Fitzgerald very well, and I'm intending to meet with him in the very near future. I've asked for a meeting to be scheduled, so I'll certainly open a dialogue with him about this.
Excellent. Thank you. And I will pick this up again in the next series of estimates once you have had more time to get into your role, Minister, and to see where that is up to.
Can I also add that I've also met with Robert Fitzgerald AM as well.
Excellent. So the understandings of the prevalence of elder abuse and the way it manifests are still evolving. And I know that there is now quite a bit of work going into understanding the nature of coercive control when it comes to elder abuse as well. Has any funding been allocated for dedicated work into understanding and addressing elder abuse?
I might have to take that question on notice if that's okay.
Okay.
Unless, of course, the Director...
Yep, I'm happy to talk about, there's a Commonwealth Elder Abuse Research Project, and New South Wales has contributed funding to that project, and it's around establishing a common data set that will work across all of the jurisdictional elder abuse helplines so that there's a better opportunity to do analysis on that data.
Okay, thank you. Just finally turning to the concept of ageing in place. Increasingly, we're seeing evidence that where possible it is preferable for older people to age in place rather than being put into aged care homes. What is your position on ageing in place, Minister?
Well, in terms of ageing in place, of course, we've got an Ageing Well in New South Wales strategy, which talks about, housing options for older people that are age appropriate, affordable, accessible, close to public transport, close to community services, the doctor, etc., recreation. We have a 10-year plan to drive better outcomes for in particular social housing tenants as well. We've got a number of programs in place. I mentioned already about the COVID-19 packages that we announced over the last 2 years.
So if I could just, bring you back to the question though. So you're supportive of the concept of ageing in place?
Very supportive, very supportive. And certainly my priority is to ensure that seniors have safe, secure housing that meets their needs.
So do you think then that we should be ensuring that the new homes we're building should be built to a standard that allows a greater number of older people to stay in their lifelong homes?
Well, look, it's a very good question, and I think that's probably a question that's probably more suited for our Minister for Planning, who is probably best suited to provide an answer in that regard.
Is it something, though, that you would be advocating for in your position as Minister for Seniors?
Certainly something I'm looking at, absolutely. And I've spoken to representatives of our MACA board on a number of occasions in regards to that.
Are you aware that Victoria, Queensland, the ACT, Tasmania and the Northern Territory have all adopted the 2022 National Construction Code minimum accessibility standards, and more than 60 different ageing, disability and social service organisations across the country are urging New South Wales to follow suit?
Yes, I am aware of that.
Will you be advocating for New South Wales to change its position on that?
I will certainly be asking the Minister for Planning to look into this.
Thank you. I think that's all for me. I'll pick up on that again at the next estimates.
That's it. Okay. I think at this juncture we'll break for 11 a.m. and come back at 1:15. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Press the button, we're on air.
Be back. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Minister, and I haven't said this officially, but congratulations on your appointment.
Thank you.
And I've been
Thank you, Mr. Coure.
I've been watching proceedings today, and you're clearly a person who takes pride in the position that you've assumed. On that note, I can tell from today's proceedings that you take pride in reaching out to various community groups and leaders. And since your appointment on December the 1st, 2021, and up until yesterday, how many groups and leaders and organizations would you say that you've met?
Well, I can't put a definite answer on that. Certainly, if I can just quickly add, there was, as of last week, 65 separate community groups, but that doesn't add the weekly multicultural community group forum that I have with anywhere from, say, 80 to 145 community groups on Zoom, the multicultural media forum that I have every week as well. I mean, these are weekly engagements. I think if you add a lot of those in, you're looking at probably close to 1,000 multicultural groups. In fact, I've got a figure here, 1,289 in attendance with a combination of forums.
1,289.
What's that?
1,289.
289 with an attendance that should also include, of course, Western Sydney and Western mayors throughout Sydney that I've met on one occasion. There is, as you'd appreciate, a number of stakeholders that I have met each and every day. Mm-hmm. As I've said before, it is one of the best jobs, I think, in government, and it's something I take very seriously.
And do you, I guess, who undertakes due diligence on organizations and individuals who are invited to those gatherings?
A lot of that is through Multicultural New South Wales.
Right. And so, Mr. La Posta, so would you, in fact, be the person responsible for due diligence? Would you, in fact, sort of say, well, I'd be reluctant to meet with that organization, or yes, you should meet with that organization, that kind of stuff?
So in terms of structured meetings, that comes through the Minister's office, and then there are times where our counsel is sought specific to who the Minister is meeting with. With regards to the forums, that's a bit of a different one, Mr. Secord, because what we've tried to do is make the online forums as available and accessible to the largest audience possible, just because it's been about critical health information relating to COVIDs or floods or things like that.
Now, when it comes to... have there been groups that you, I guess I'm going to ask you to reveal, but have there been groups that you've declined to meet since becoming minister?
Well, I'm going to have to take that question on notice. There are, as Minister for Multiculturalism, you'd appreciate and understand there are, 315 ancestries out there. They speak 200 plus languages, worshipping and believing in 148 different religions. Certainly, my job as Minister for Multiculturalism and Minister for Seniors, for that matter, has and will always be about putting people first.
Now, Minister, I want to take you to, I guess, who manages your social media, your ministerial press releases, and I guess your local press releases? Who does that?
A whole group of people.
And do you get involved in suggesting what goes up and what goes down, that kind of stuff?
At times, yes.
Yes. Have you recently instructed your staff to remove press releases that were issued when you were assistant speaker and held other positions before you became minister?
No, we've actually got a brand new website that went online only 2 weeks ago.
Ah, right. And so if I clicked on there today, you've done interviews about going to China, undertaking trips to China and things like that. So if I clicked on there, and from estimates that when you ask a question, a lot of times the person asking the question knows the answer before. So if you clicked on a website from your activities involving China, would they still be there?
I've got no idea. The website only went online 2 weeks ago.
Did you instruct, or maybe you'll take this on notice or you can answer, did you instruct your office to remove all links to, now, you can remove them in the short term, but you can't take them from history. So did you instruct your office to remove all your press releases that related to your trips to China?
No, not at all.
Well, then why, for the last 3 days, that when you go onto the website to get them, they've all been removed? You can't remove the fact that you posted a reference to them originally.
Yeah, sure.
So did you instruct your office to remove all references to your repeated trips to China?
We have a new website which has just been uploaded in the last 2-3 weeks.
So you're telling me that in the last 2 to 3 weeks, you're unaware that all of your activity involving China has been scrubbed, and the only thing that you get, and I'll see, you get HTTP 404 not found on all previous. Now, when you go into the internet, you can actually look at when things were originally posted, but if someone's removed them, you can't remove the original posting, but you can remove it. So
we have a new.
So who did you instruct in your office to remove all references to China on your?
I didn't instruct anyone.
Well then, okay,
we have
chief of staff, or did a staff member take it upon themselves to whitewash?
We have a new website, as you'd expect, an updated website that literally over Christmas is now online. We've gone from one company to another. And that website has media releases that are current, old, but it is a brand new website with a different, brand new company.
Right. So, Mr. Chair, I seek leave to table 3 documents: the photograph with the President of China, which has been removed, and the original posting referring to your trips, and the reference to the removal of those documents. Thank you. Now, I want to take you to your trips to China. How many trips have you taken to China since you became a member in 2011?
I'll take that question on notice.
Well, I don't think you should take that on notice, because in many interviews... Sorry, was there an objection there?
Taking a point of order?
Yeah, take it on notice.
Okay, I accept that the minister will take that on notice, but just to assist...
To the point of order, the minister doesn't have the option of taking a matter on notice that is within his immediate knowledge. If he's capable of answering the question, and he should be capable of answering that question, he doesn't have the right to take it on notice. He needs to answer the question.
Thank you, Mr. Diadam.
To the point of order, it's abundantly clear, had the minister known the answer, he wouldn't have taken it on notice in the first place.
Mr. Chair, may I make a contribution? To assist the minister, his parliamentary declarations from 2011 till now, the most recent, show that he had made 5 trips to China. However, in an interview with the Chinese media called Southeast Net Australia website, with a journalist identified as Han, published on April the 8th, 2016, he said that he's made at least 8 trips to China. So very aware that to what Mr. Diadam said, that very clear the minister would know how many trips he's taken to China since 2011. In his declarations, he says 5, and in printed media, he says 8 times. I suggest that he answer the question.
As I said before, we'll take that question on notice.
Minister, have all your trips to China been fully declared?
Yes, I believe so. But I will take that question on notice.
Taking that on notice. But do you understand that there's a discrepancy? So in your parliamentary declarations, it appears 5 visits. But in an interview translated into English, it says that you've in fact had 8 separate trips. Now, why are you taking it on notice? Is it because you don't remember, you've gone there so many times that you don't remember, or you want to provide an exact figure? What is the reason that
I want to provide an exact figure. for you and for the committee.
So do you think that there's a discrepancy between your declarations 5 times? So were you in fact just embellishing then in the Chinese media interview?
I don't remember the interview, but I will take it on notice.
Are you familiar with an organization called the Australia-China Economic Trade and Cultural Association?
Yes, I am.
You are, right. Was that that's the association where you were in fact a keynote speaker, is that correct?
Yes, among other things.
Do you remember what were the other things?
Well, other people, that is.
Oh, among other people. What year was that?
I'll take that on notice.
You'll take that on notice.
Yep.
Did that occur? Where did that occur in China?
Again, I'll take that on notice.
You don't remember where it occurred?
It would have been somewhere in China, but I'll take that on notice.
Are you familiar with something called the Australian Strategic Policy Institute?
No, I'm not.
You're not?
No, I don't think so, no.
No, it's a very, very, very famous think tank. They've made scathing remarks about the Australia-China Economic Trade and Cultural Association. Mm-hmm. Do you remember now?
Of the think tank?
No, the time you addressed the Australia-China Economic Trade and Cultural Association.
Yes, I do.
Okay, so what was the subject of your talk?
Of my address? It would have been infrastructure and our relationship with China.
Mm-hmm. Was that where you met the president of China? There's a photograph.
No, that was here in Australia.
That was here in Australia.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, good.
With a number of members of Parliament,
right.
including the Premier Mike Baird.
Yep, yeah, I remember that. So back to the press releases. So are you now? You seem to be quite an interventionist minister. You're quite active in what's happening in your local electorate. I see that you engage in door knocking, local activity, that kind of stuff. I'll ask you one more time. Did you instruct your office to remove all press releases relating to you in China?
No, not at all. There's a whole bunch of media releases, current and former, that for whatever reason are slowly being uploaded onto our new website, and it is a brand new website. The bill was only paid 3-4 weeks ago.
Are you confident that all of your declarations involving China are up to date and accurate involving the Parliament?
Yes, I am. But I'll report back to you.
Can you report back this afternoon?
I'll report back to you.
Mr. Chair, that ends my questions.
No more questions? Mr. Adam?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I might come back to Ms. Smith. I wanted to, earlier you said that the Aging and Disability Commission obviously is a statutory office. Are you aware whether it employs staff directly?
So my understanding is the Commissioner is a statutory appointment. The other staff that work in the Commissioner's office are DCJ employees to Department of Communities and Justice.
What role does your office have in relation to the sort of the ageing dimension of the role of the Commission?
None. So we have a relationship with them, obviously, because of elder abuse being significant to the strategy, but definitely I have no oversight over how the Commissioner operates his office or the employees in that office.
Was your office involved in the development of the legislation that's established the Commission?
I was personally. It wasn't specifically the team that exists now.
I see. And so did you, so in terms of the staffing arrangements, you provided recommendations around how the staffing structure to support the work of the Commissioner would be established?
Yes, at the time there would have been a submission around the resourcing that the Commissioner would require.
And so was the question of support for elder abuse investigations ever considered in terms of the staffing that would be supplied by the Department of Communities and Justice to support the work of the Commissioner considered?
Yes, so all of the requirements under the Act that the Commissioner is responsible for would have formed part of what resourcing was requested for the Commission.
So you have no role in terms of recommendations around the types of support that Communities and Justice provides to the Commissioner?
In terms of, it's not as simple as, I suppose it's not as straightforward as DCJ providing staff. The staff sit within DCJ in terms of administratively and then can use shared resources with the department, but we don't provide staff as such to the Commissioner. They're part of the establishment and the administrative systems set up for managing employees.
So there's a clear demarcation between the work of the Commissioner and the staff that support their work and DCJ's employees. Is that
correct? So, for example, yes, staff from my seniors team wouldn't, say, for example, be deployed to work in the Commission.
Okay. Now, I might come back to the Aged Crime Prevention Officer's commitment. Minister, were you able to get some further information in relation to that commitment and where it's up to?
Yeah, I certainly can. And at the 2019 election, the New South Wales Government 2019 election, the New South Wales Government announced that it would deliver 1,500 new police officers over 4 years, including every command appointing an aged crime prevention officer. The Ageing and Disability Commission is provided funding by DCJ and work closely with aged crime prevention officers. I look forward to continuing to work with the Commission to ensure seniors live a happy, healthy and fulfilling lives. I will also work closely with Mr Police to continue the rollout. In terms of particular numbers, in terms of what has been delivered, I'll take that on notice if I can.
I see. So you don't have specific information about how many are actually in place?
Let me just double check on that. We might have through our Director of Ageing.
Yep. As far as I understand, I believe there's 12 currently in place.
12 in place. Okay, thank you. I might move to another item. Minister, are you aware of the Legal Pathways program that's provided by Coure?
I might take that on notice unless the Director for Ageing...
I'm aware of that program that Coure New South Wales administers.
And what's the status of its funding? Is it funded, first of all, is it funded through DCJ?
It isn't, no.
It's not funded by a direct grant?
Not currently, no.
Are you aware of, is it a state government funded program?
It had been in the past, but I understand that Coure New South Wales has continued that program with other funding. I'm not exactly sure. I'd have to take it on notice. It's possible that they use their some of their annual peak funding that's provided by the department for that service.
I see. So there's no ongoing funding from DCJ?
Not specific for that program.
Service, as far as you're aware?
Correct.
Minister, this is a program that provides support to older people in relation to wills and creating enduring power of attorney. Do you think it's appropriate that the New South Wales Government should be providing financial support to an organisation to deliver a service like this?
Well, it sounds like a very worthwhile organisation, and I'll take that on notice, unless, of course, the Director of Ageing wanted to add any further.
There are comparable programs that I believe the Trustee and Guardian provides, where we've directed people who are on low incomes to use that service, and I understand that Coure New South Wales does charge a fee to the older people that use their service, so they're comparable in what they provide, but I suppose targeted to different cohorts.
I see. Ms. Smith, can you tell me what's the priority age for social housing?
For older people, I believe that's 80.
Older people, sorry, yes, for older people. It's 80, is it? Mm-hmm. Why is it that? Why is it so old? Like, why is it set at that level, that age? Why not at 55? What's the basis for the decision to set it at 80?
I think that's a question that would probably be best put to the Minister for Family and Community Services or Minister for Homes.
Does that concern you, Minister, that the priority level's set at such an age at 80? It cuts out a lot of people. Is that something that you've made reps on or been an advocate to change?
If it's okay,
Minister?
Yep, if it's okay with yourself, we'll take that on notice and we'll refer that question directly to the Minister for Families and Communities and Disability Services, the Honourable Natasha McLaren-Jones, who is the Minister responsible for this area.
Thank you, Minister. Minister, are you aware about the Victorian Government's pledge to build social housing for seniors as part of its big housing build? Are you aware of that?
No, I'm not, no.
You're not aware of it?
No.
Do you think there's a role for the New South Wales Government to provide direct support to increase the supply of specialist senior housing for people in New South Wales?
Well, certainly under our strategy, as I mentioned before, the Community Plus program, which is delivering, 23,000 social housing, 500 affordable housing, 40,000 private dwellings over 10 years. This is a $1.1 billion social and affordable housing fund, which is delivering in addition to that, the $1.1 billion social and affordable housing fund is delivering, 3,400 social and affordable housing dwellings throughout New South Wales over the next 4 years. In addition to that, of course, with over 40% of dwellings targeted for tenants aged over 55. And of course, we also provided, as I mentioned before, funding for $34 million in funding to prevent people from experiencing homelessness, $14 million for emergency accommodation, in addition to $20 million for rental subsidies and to enable people to access or sustain private.
Can you just reflect the homelessness figure? How much was that?
So March of 2020, the New South Wales Government released the second stage of its economic package in response to COVID-19. So this included $34 million in funding to prevent people from experiencing homelessness, $14 million for emergency accommodation to enable, as part of that 34, I should say, $14 million for emergency accommodation.
Okay.
And then
can I ask you about that 34 million then? How much of that is directed towards programs to deal with homelessness amongst senior New South Wales residents?
Well, I might pass this on to the Director of Ageing if I can.
I might take that on notice. Thank you.
You're not aware of how much of that substantial program is in your ballot, Ms. Smith, sorry?
We'll reach out to the Minister for Families and Community Services and Disability Services, the Honourable Natasha McLaren-Jones, for a more detailed response, I think, unless the Director of Ageing has further information.
I've got a little bit more information. So as part of there's $183 million dedicated to fast track more than 1,400 new homes. Some of that is around the delivery of 2,800 homes, including 1,000 social homes to be built in Western Sydney, Wagga and Coffs Harbour through the Community Plus programs. 290 new social houses in partnership with community housing providers through the Innovation Fund, and there were $30 million for 80 new small-scale social housing programs. And older people, older women especially, have told us that those smaller scale housing projects are what they're interested in terms of avoiding homelessness. So some of those are being delivered through that broader program.
It doesn't sound like there's any clear and discernible dimension that's focused on homelessness and housing for seniors. Why is that?
Well, as part of the 3,400 social and affordable houses, 1,414 are targeting older people 55 years and over, or 45 years and over for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And as of 31st of March 2021, 1,368 of the 2,792 people living in homes delivered through the Social and Affordable Housing Fund are older people, and of these, 864 are older women.
Minister, are you aware of an organisation in Victoria called Housing for the Aged Action Group? They run a program called Home at Last. Are you aware of that program?
Running a program called? What did you say?
Home at Last.
COVID last. What was it?
Home at Last.
Oh, Home at Last. Sorry. Home at Last.
It's a diversion program to try and help older citizens to find homes.
Is that a peak organisation?
I don't believe so. I think it's just a community organisation.
Right.
Ms. Smythe, are you aware of that? Sorry, Smith, are you aware of that program?
Yes, vaguely aware of that program and recent reports.
Is there any contemplation being given to either establishing or funding a similar program in New South Wales?
Again, I think that's a question for the Minister for Family and Community Services, but I understand that it's an information program to help older people navigate the housing and homelessness services in Victoria. And New South Wales has comparable services, but yeah, I think it's better answered for the Minister responsible.
And if I can just jump in, we will reach out to the Minister for Family and Community Services and Disability Services in regards to your question and that peak body or community organisation in Victoria, and we'll have an appropriate response for you.
It seems that a lot of the work within this portfolio is really actually delivered by other agencies. I'm having trouble sort of understanding where the value add is coming from in terms of this portfolio. Perhaps, Minister, you might be able to explain the sort of the intervention points that where this portfolio really has some impact on the overall policy direction of the programs that are directed towards addressing senior needs that are being delivered by other agencies. It's not really clear to me where the value add is being provided by the agency.
Well, look, in terms of the agency in regards to a couple of points here in terms of, let's talk about our grants program. Certainly the government is committed to the aims of, firstly, the Ageing Well strategy, of course. We talked about that before. And one way of doing that is by administering grant programs that benefit seniors right across New South Wales. Certainly our record, $200,000 this year in the Seniors Festival grants program space, $600,000 in the 2021-2022 round 2 of the Reducing Reducing Social Isolation Seniors Grant Program, and backed up by another $600,000 in the round one of that similar program. In addition to that, I should say, also $700,000 in combating social isolation for seniors during the COVID pandemic, and that's.
These grants programs, are they actually administered by Miss Smith's office, or is this something that's run through another agency?
In terms of the programming and
provide some information about the role of your office in relation to the grants programs that the ministry is.
In terms of the grants program, I agree. In terms of, I understand your question, in terms of the grants program, I'll pass you on to the Director of Ageing, who will be able to add further to my response.
The Reducing Social Isolation in Seniors grants are managed within the ageing team in Department of Communities and Justice.
Right. Is that the only grants program that they administer?
There's also a Seniors Festival grants program for organisations and community groups to run activities during Seniors Week.
And in addition to that, obviously there's the Seniors Staying Social Grants Program, there's New South Wales Grandparents Day Grants Program, and I think we touched on the Tech Savvy Program, I think, didn't we? That, of course, is another additional program which I'm sure you're aware of. I mean, the Seniors Festival Grants Program, Seniors Grant Festival Program, of course, has funding available for local events and activities across the state. The Combating Social Isolation for Seniors grants, the risk of social isolation for seniors. That funding program, of course, has been delivered, $700,000 awarded to 24 organisations. A lot of this, of course, is publicly available, but this is funding directly to councils and community groups, to people in need right across New South Wales. And of course, as you know, we have, of course, the Seniors Festival, which is coming up at the end of March, which is a huge event in Darling Harbour and across New South Wales.
I might pass to my colleague and come back to you later on in the proceedings, Minister.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Laposta, just taking you back to my questions with regards to interpreter and translator services. I note a letter from Michael Coutts-Trotter, Secretary to Communities and Justice in May 2021 with regards to the interpreter and translator services, where he effectively threatened to outsource if you don't provide services on cost-effective and value-for-money basis. What was the outcome of the discussions? Has that been met?
Through the Minister.
Through to you.
That's okay. Mr. Mosman, very pleased to advise that the outcome was incredibly positive, that we reached not a consent agreement, but no objection from the Public Service Association with regards to the modifications, and I believe Secretary Coutts-Trotter, and I'm very grateful for his leadership in this space, subsequently sent another a letter addressed to myself, which confirmed that should the proposal be agreed to with the Public Service Association, that New South Wales Courts, and I've already spoken to Secretary Tidball about this, that will ensure that that space will stay with Multicultural New South Wales and guarantee that work for our interpreters and translators for the next 3 years. So positive outcome, Mr. Mosman.
Well, that sounds excellent, and I'm pleased with that, because my next question was what steps you're going to take to ensure that DCJ will continue to use as specialist services. So you've got them for the next 3 years. Can I just...
the courts.
The courts. Yes. Yep. Okay. Yes. So that was Mr. Coutts-Trotter's letter with regards specifically to courts. Is that as I understand it from you?
If we're reading the same letter, well, if you're referring to the letter, and I don't need you to table it necessarily because I'm familiar with the letter. I'm just mindful that you said DCJ before, and I didn't want there to be a misunderstanding that the entirety of the interpreting and translating services from DCJ were a part of that letter. That letter was very specific relating to the courts, and Secretary Tidball has ensured continuity, and his team and mine are already working to sign up the new 3-year agreement.
Yeah, and he mentions there at least for the next 3 years, and you've indicated that.
Hopefully many more, Mr. Mossamane.
That was accepted. Can I just ask you a few broad general questions? First, about the significance of multicultural media.
Sorry, can I just Chair, through you, do questions need to be addressed to me, or should they be addressed to the Minister?
If they can be addressed to me, if that's okay.
Well, they're through the Minister, obviously, but if the Minister wishes to
we'll have a crack.
pass them on. Well, Minister, can you tell me how critical a role multicultural media plays?
Well, you know, I can't express it enough, the significant role of multicultural media has played and will continue to play. As I said before, you know, we have multicultural media press conferences. In fact, I have one this week, as I do every other week. You and I both know the importance of multicultural media. I see you regularly in the multicultural media, Mr. Mosselman. And you know, my message to members, both upper house and lower house, is use multicultural media more. It's there. They want information. They're eager for information. And of course, they've done a brilliant job in particular last couple of years, getting important health and government messages out. And, you know, we've seen the evolution of media change in the last sort of 20 years. Now it's mostly online. But many of these newspapers, print media, have been around for decades, run by mums and dads. In fact, I was in a lot of the Greek media, a lot of the multicultural media, but in particular, I was in the Greek Herald last week.
Wonderful story.
You know, talking about the importance of multiculturalism and the importance of, multiculturalism in Australia. And we do, as you know, live in one of the most multicultural cities anywhere in the world. And I can't praise multicultural media enough. They do a wonderful job. And in addition to that, of course, there's, of course, Multicultural New South Wales has also done an amazing job, and, you know, through their translation of over 3,000 resources covering public health information in more than 60 languages, and they've worked closely with multicultural media, SBS, to translate those lively daily press conferences we've all seen in over 10 important languages. And I think I do believe the first one was in fact in Arabic, and that was huge for the Arabic community across Australia, but particularly in New South Wales. As you know, my mother-in-law is Lebanese, and certainly her family clicked into that because it's important for them to hear that and to see the messaging of the importance of the health advice and so forth in regards to COVID-19.
Yeah, they are no doubt very significant and very, very important to our multicultural society, providing the very important information in languages that multicultural communities can understand best. But following on those comments you make, Minister, do you have a specific budget for multicultural media? Is there a specific budget that you, for example, your Multicultural New South Wales budget is, say, 70 million. Is there a 10% budget for multicultural media? Is there a particular percentage?
We might have answered, sorry to cut you off, we might have answered that already, but I'll throw, because it's an operational, through to Mr. Laposta.
No. We don't have. I mean, you can see, Minister, the significance of multicultural media, not only print, but online, and online they're growing as well. There's a great source of service providers out there in multicultural media, service provided to multicultural communities. Would you consider looking at providing a specific budget? Because as you said rightly, Minister, these media outlets survive on a smell of an oily rag, as they say. The mums and dads, or one or two or three staff that run a newspaper. It's important that there are funding from New South Wales to ensure their survival, because through them, by ensuring their survival, you're ensuring that the information that you want to pass through to those communities is well received.
Look, it's a great suggestion. I'll take that on notice. But if I can just add to that, 74 multicultural media groups were awarded or part of a program, a $2 million program for multicultural media outlets through a competitive multimedia grants program. In addition to that, since the Delta outbreak, COVID-19, in Sydney, a total $13.1 million of funding for communications and incentives were secured. And this funding included, emergency communications, multicultural media, grants, translations, advertising for vulnerable communities. So there certainly is money available, but I might, to add to that response, ask Mr Laposta to add to that response.
Yeah, thanks, Minister. Mr Mossman, I think there's two roles the agency needs to play. I think the first role is to advocate and sometimes remind the rest of government of the value of exactly what you spoke about before, which is they engage a specific and different audience from a lot of mainstream media channels. I mean, so many of us in this room have got a lived experience of connecting with media sources that are not our traditional sources and understand the value, particularly for some of our older demographics or our new and emerging communities, that is their source of truth, and that it is a different source from what a lot of us turn on to the TV every day or on social media. So part of our role is to say to the rest of government, hang on, don't forget these people, or, spend the absolute bare minimum with them, build partnerships and relationships that can truly help you understand how to connect with this audience and therefore potentially do better work than we've done before, or create new and interesting ways to be able to engage these groups to see a part of themselves through government policy or through the work of government or some of our programs or some of our initiatives. I think of things like the Active Kids voucher and the learnings from government the first time that voucher came about, and then thinking about how we got better at targeting communities in Western and Southwestern Sydney, and to see the lift in culturally diverse families that then took that voucher up in the second and third generations. So part of our thinking is about how we work to build an awareness or a cultural competency across government to the value of multicultural media and the different players that are in that space. With respect, I think the Minister said that we understood the value of partnering with those 74 organisations during COVID, and my hope is, and it's, like all of us, we've got competing priorities for our time and our funding, but my hope is to use that as a bit of a springboard to continue to really nurture those relationships and support those multicultural media players, because I think you and I, and the Minister certainly knows, and the Greek Herald's a great example where it's gone through different generations, father passing it down to two daughters who have really run with that and, brought it not just to be through its traditional print form, but brought it into an online sphere as well to engage a different audience as well. We can't lose them, because they are critical to underpinning a lot of members of our society, and my great fear is that if we don't nurture them and the government doesn't invest in them, then we may see some of them fall away.
And that's the key, if I can just add to that. And I think that's the key. They have been passed on. The Greek papers, the Greek media outlets, the Arabic media outlets, the Chinese media outlets, even the Maltese Herald. I mean, a lot of them have been passed on from generation to generation. And certainly, as part of my portfolio, my remit as Minister for Seniors and Multiculturalism, I want to make sure that no community is left behind. And that's why this funding block is so important. And that's certainly why that, regular outreach from me as Minister in Multiculturalism New South Wales every week, not set and forget once or 2 or 3 times a year, every single week, I should say, to engage with these communities, to provide them with the much needed information, not from me or from what I'm doing, but not just from me or from what I'm doing, but right across New South Wales in terms of New South Wales health and so forth. We've also got, and it's a very good point, we've also got the Premier's Harmony Dinner, which was 2 weeks ago, where we acknowledge, multicultural media awards as well in that Harmony Dinner, where we were able to award, very good organisations who have done an outstanding job, particularly over the last year or two. But I also just want to add, sorry to interrupt, members like yourself, Mr Mosselman, understand as well the importance of multicultural media, and you and I have been to many, many events over the years and see that importance. And my message to all members of Parliament on both sides of the political fence and in both chambers is get to know multicultural media. It's a very good tool to get out very important information for respective communities.
Yeah, that's the core point there, is get that information to those communities where they can read it, understand it, and assist the government in their initiatives or projects. You mentioned about 74 organisations. I know that there are many established organisations. El Telegraph, for example, is around since 79, and others been around for a long, long time. But these days, a lot of them are going digital, and there are new digital services out there that can be of significant assistance to Multicultural New South Wales, as well as through them to the communities. Are you reaching out to these organisations? The other day, as an example, I met with Bangladeshi community and visited the bookshop, and just talking to people, there are 10 new, well, at least 10 they mentioned, new online Bangladeshi outlets. So there are a growing number of outlets out there. Is there a way or policy that your department, through your minister to Mr. Laposta, reaching out to these organisations or these newly established media outlets?
Mr. Laposta.
Mr Mosselman, I guess two things. The first thing is we need to ensure the sustainability of our existing media players. Sure. And I think a lot of our communities at times, get quite ambitious about their sort of standing within the community, and there's nothing wrong with that, but then set up a communication platform or a channel that can often be very well-meaning, but we just need to make sure that it connects and reaches with the audience that some of them profess to reach as well. Yeah. It's not like a lot of us, you get a click or a like on something, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's been read or digested or understood. So I think the premise of your question is very sound. What can Multicultural New South Wales continue to do to work with multicultural media outlets? And as the Minister said before, we've taken a lot of learnings from the partners that we supported through that Multicultural Media Grant, of which there was 74. But that investment of that grant program was very much just about helping support the sustainability of those organisations during COVID, knowing they were losing a lot of advertising revenue, having to stand staff down, all of those things. So what the government thought was it is critical that we continue to nourish this space, because what we don't want is the Greek Herald not printing its paper, or what we don't want is, La Fiamma or some of the other papers stopping because they don't have the workforce or they don't have the support in place.
Fiamma did stop, didn't it?
Well, but if you think about, and I think I need to check this with Julius on the specifics of these things, but the whole premise of these grants was to help support them and underwrite and enable them to continue during the pandemic. Really, the essence of what your question is how can government ensure that it continues to fund and engage with these players? And that's why during the pandemic, I know there was over $13 million that this agency directly oversaw, which was about advertising revenue to support the Department of Customer Service so that we didn't lead it, but to help fund them to make sure that, during challenging times, during Delta, for example, every single community radio station in Western Sydney was supported with advertising revenue to make sure that the stay-at-home messaging was nuanced to each of the different communities, but each of the communities understood what it meant to stay at home and who to be in the house. Not extended family, but immediate family. So there are some really good examples, and my hope is that we take some really good learnings out of COVID and then apply them right across the board into all of BAU for government. And one of the key learnings was the value and the importance of different media channels, including multicultural media.
And subsequent to that,
sorry, just to add to that, if I can, certainly as a Member of Parliament, I have over many, many years engaged with multicultural media, just, for even just advertising, to your point, to even just in advertising with, Ramadan that's coming up, and I believe we've put an ad in Harmony Day that's coming up. Again, we've put an ad in.
How they survived.
And that's how they survived. That's exactly right. We just had we just had Lunar New Year. Pardon me, and we had, of course, it's the Year of the Tiger, and of course we had Lunar New Year, where we put in ads as well in some of the Chinese papers, one or two of them. Advertising is so important, and if it's not me as a Member of Parliament, it's government departments and agencies, and not just the print media, but SBS, SBS radio, SBS online as well, and local radio too. I mean, this is the other thing. I mean, local radio, not targeted for multicultural, not just multicultural communities, but local radio that targets every community. Yeah. Certainly over the years, you know, I've put in a radio ad in our local radio station that sort of covers the St George and southwest Sydney to NBC. They do a great job, and I'm a big supporter of local radio right throughout New South Wales. I think they do a wonderful job. Unfortunately, there's no idea of how many listeners to local radio, because it's not calculated. But still, you know, certainly as a Member of Parliament, we've backed up my words with actions by supporting our local radio and our multicultural print media and radio as well. On a separate occasion, a few weeks ago, I was on 2AC from memory, or 2OR. I think 2OR is coming up. Fijian Times. I mean, they play such an important role in terms of getting very important health messages out, and not just health messages, but you know, government messages as well.
I'll ask one more question with regards to multicultural media, and that is with regards to newer communities that are coming in. For example, El Telegraph is an Arabic newspaper. The Iraqis read Arabic, and so they can read the El Telegraph, and so the Syrians. But the Syrians, the Iraqis, for example, they have their own concerns, and therefore they will be producing, I'm not sure the exact name of the newspapers, producing their own newspapers. If we continue just to support the established ones, then we will never grow these new ones that are coming on board that address concerns of new migrants, new refugees coming through from Syrians and maybe Ukrainians and others that would need direct.
It's a very good question. Yeah, very good point. And I think it's very important that certainly as Minister for Multiculturalism, we look at all the newer communities and the multicultural media that they have created over the last period, the last short time. And, you know, it's something that I know Multicultural New South Wales is looking into on a regular basis, because they are, you're right, they are newer communities, very, very important communities. Yeah. And, you know, they've got their own print media, or they'll have their own social media, where a lot of the media these days, as you know, is going online. It's very, very important to be looking at these newer communities. Like, for example, you mentioned before the Bangladeshis and the Nepalese, for example, relatively new to Australian, big numbers, and certainly, you know, newspapers, print media, social media, websites, the Bangladeshis have exploded in terms of media, and very good media too, and reporting regular in terms of what's happening in Sydney and New South Wales. A lot of it, as you know, is, and I've had a lot of dealings with the Bangladeshi media over the years, a lot of hopefully that's not allowing me to wind up, but very quickly, if I can.
I'll continue.
If I can continue very quickly, you know, that media with that community group have done an outstanding job, and certainly, you know, I'm here supporting that media group, the Bangladeshi community. They're quite an important, very important community in Sydney, particularly in southwest Sydney, and I went to a Bangladeshi event last Friday night with the member for East Hills.
Yeah. Thank you for those responses, Minister. Can I just noticed this issue with regards to Multicultural New South Wales email link services. What does Multicultural New South Wales email link services provide?
That's an operational matter, so I'll turn to Mr. LaPosta if I can.
Didn't you ask me this question last time?
Yeah, I'm asking you again.
And didn't we clarify it last time?
Well, no, I don't think I asked you this one, but I'm asking you now.
Okay, email link has been refreshed and reset. So what we did with the email link was we did a good clean of the database. which was the first thing, because I think through one of these hearings, yourself or one of your colleagues raised some concern about receiving an advert for a job opportunity at ABC or somewhere like that. So what we did was we ceased a lot of the corporate contracts that we had with people that were helping sort of subsidise and underwrite the service, and we just made sure that it was very much focused on critical government information, health information, updates around the pandemic, grant programs opening and closing, vaccination messaging, all of these sorts of things, where it was very much defined on what are the key things that our community, religious community leaders, members of parliament such as yourself and others need to know, and how can we try and package that up as effectively as possible. And I'm really proud of some of the things that have happened, things like the MP packs and some of the other things, which have actually given so many of our members, such as yourself and others on the ground, really tangible and helpful information just to forward straight onto the community. And I'm pleased that my team advises me that database is again growing organically because of the value that it provides.
Thank you for that. And the reason I asked...
Can I just add to that?
Yeah.
Those MP packages is something that I've really pushed for, both as a Member of Parliament, now a Minister. They're coming out almost every week, if not every week.
They are, yeah.
And it's not just Members of Parliament on both sides, it's right across the Parliament, and it's also councils as well. And I want to acknowledge the wonderful work the local government plays in getting messages out to multicultural communities, and we push very, very hard. And I want to acknowledge the great work of Multicultural New South Wales and Department of DCJ, New South Wales Health, in making sure that material is translated as quickly as possible. And certainly, when we took over in the last week in December, from memory, we made sure we worked very hard behind the scenes to make sure that material is translated very, very quick. Because as you understand, you might be making a health announcement on the Monday, then have it translated. But by next Monday, once it goes out, that material is outdated. We made sure there was a quicker turnaround time to get that information as quickly as possible.
The reason I asked Mr. Leposta, and you said that I asked you before, is that I looked at the Multicultural New South Wales website, and it says email link is in hibernation. What does that mean?
Well, as I said to you before, what we did was we stopped all of the other sort of communicative channels that we had because, yourself or one of your colleagues raised concern that they were receiving information that they didn't think was critical to the function and the role of the agency. So we took that feedback on board. I don't even think it was the last budget estimates. It might have been even the one before. And then what we did was we focused it exclusively on the critical health information, grant information, how to get information right now out through floods, how to get information out through COVID, how to promote vaccinations and all of those things. So when we say email link is in hibernation, it's in hibernation in a sense because it's not promoting the broader things. It's very much just focused on the critical health information. I didn't want to stop the channel, and I'm sure you can appreciate, because a lot of people do consume it, and if we'd stopped it altogether, then we wouldn't be able to use that channel during the pandemic to get the information out.
So why not remove the word hibernation and say it's critical information?
Great piece
when
of
I saw it, I
feedback.
thought there's something wrong.
Yep. Oh, look, it wasn't something wrong, but it's like any database. It needs to be washed and filtered and make sure it's still relevant and current. There's no point in me telling you there's 10,000 names on there if 5,000 of them no longer exist. Or, as you know, Mr. Mossamain, a lot of the members of our community and a lot of the leaders within our community can change and shift very quickly. So we need to be making sure that our databases are up to date and our Salesforce and our tracking so that we're communicating with the people that we need to in the current moment. We're not talking to someone that was the president 5 years ago. Yeah. So in terms of an action, very much happy to get the team to review that and remove any references to hibernation, and that's fine.
Because it just looks like it's...
Understood. And updating... Sorry to interrupt. Updating this information is very important and very critical. And certainly over the years, we've all seen databases that are, 5, 6 years old of the president twice removed. You know what I mean, of a particular group. And I think these guys have done a great job in making sure that there is up-to-date information and that the database itself or databases are continually updated.
Thank you, Minister. While on the website, can I ask, in terms of the next rounds of grants, have they been announced, or are they going to be? Have they been announced already? Are they on the website, or are you planning for the next round of grants? the reason why I ask, so I don't go around this particular issue, is that when looking at multicultural media COVID-19 response grants, they're now closed. That's what the website says. When looking at Multicultural New South Wales COVID-19 community support grants, they're now closed. Looking at the innovation grants, they're now closed. Stronger Together Festival and event grants, they're now closed. And there's one more that's about to be closed. So wouldn't the website should have the next round, the announcement for the next round, rather than just say they're closed and people won't know when the next round is?
That is an operational matter, so if that's okay, I'll pass you on to Joseph Laposta, and then I'll add a few comments at the end.
Mr Mosman, I think, and I could be wrong, but the $4 million that the Minister only recently announced around COVID support, I understood was still to be open, but I'll get the specifics on that. If it's closed, it's only just closed, and if it's only just closed, the reason it's closed and it was only open for a short period of time was because, the feedback... Which
grant was that? I'm sorry, Mr Laposta.
It's been the latest round of Empowering Communities grants, which are, I think, between 5,000 and 30,000, which are, and the member, Mr Shoebridge, touched on this before. What support are we providing to multicultural communities ongoing during COVID? Because there's still a lot of challenges around cost of living, access to food, access to all of those things. I'm advised that grant is still open, so a plug for that grant, please jump on the website, multicultural.nsw.gov.au, and all of our community and religious organisations can apply for that grant. With respect to the other grants that are closed, Mr Mosman, in one sense, that's a very positive story because that highlights the sheer volume of activity that this agency has undertaken to support the community during the pandemic. So to know all of those have closed is great. With regards to the festivals and events, we have a current round of funding which is being distributed to communities between January and July. And then what we will do is we will open the next round of festival and event funding from July through to January, to the end of this year. And we'll open the next round of project grants at some stage in and around that time as well for the subsequent 12 months as well. So yeah, it's very cyclical. The reason that the grants have closed is because they're running the festivals and events right now for the first 6 months, and then we'll open another. And can I just come back to the point you made before, because I think it's important. It's all well and good for government to open grant programs. The critical things are, who are the audiences that we're potentially not talking to that need our help the most, and how can we work with those communities and build capacity within those communities so that when they do apply for funding, that they're in with a shot, rather than it just goes to the same organisations who are very competent in grant programs or just change, the year or the detail on some of those grants. So it's critical that my team works, identifies, and, the challenge, and this is another thing I'm very grateful for this Minister for, any member of Parliament that has community organisations that they would like us to engage, please come through the Minister, and our office will happily engage them and try to get them to these workshops and these capacity building sessions to help them with their grant writing or to help support them on their evolution in terms of their emergence. So I'll pass back to the Minister, but that's probably a fair snapshot in terms of where we're at with the website.
Look, if I can just add to that very briefly, grants are promoted widely through social media, through the website, digital promotion, stakeholder networks as well. The MP Toolkit also has some information about the grants as well. As you said, organisations can apply through multiculturalnewsouthwales.gov.au. There are guidelines that are developed for all these programs, and of course, each application is initially assessed by Multicultural New South Wales to determine it meets all of the requirements. And certainly you gave a plug, Mr Laposta, with the festival and events grants. In 2021, 2022, there were just over $1 million distributed to 109 community organisations, over and above the other festival grants that we've provided funding for. And a bit of a plug, I think it's this Sunday, is the Greek Festival at Darling Harbour.
Was it postponed? It may have been.
May have been postponed again.
I think we were worried about
it's coming up.
The weather. It is. It's on its way.
I'm sure the Greeks will continue to run the festival. I think they're running it throughout the year. It's not just one festival, one program. Finally, before I pass over to my colleague, we celebrated International Women's Day just recently. Can you give me an example, an assessment on what is the breakdown of women in the executive and management position in the multicultural New South Wales?
Well, that's an operational matter, as you know, and that might have been asked last budget estimates, I believe, not by yourself, but by someone else. So I will turn to maybe Mr. Laposta.
Thanks. Through you, Minister. Mr. Mosman, excellent question. And there's three things I'm really proud of. One is the gender diversity of our advisory board. And I think at the moment, with the introduction of new members, it now sits at either 55 or 60% female, which is pleasing. The second thing is the composition of our executive team, which is 60% female. And then the third thing is the composition of our workforce, which is about, again, somewhere between 60 and 65% female. So in terms of the composition, in terms of gender equality across our advisory board, our senior leadership team, our executive and also our workforce, it is certainly front and centre in our thinking. And can I say that that is one of our great assets as an agency, because one of the things that is really important for our agency to do is navigate and tackle complex social policy challenges, and we do so with people like Ms Smythe and Mr Tidball and others, where we really need to unpack some of the challenges around access to accommodation, challenges around domestic violence, challenges around patriarchal, societies or groups that are coming to this country and need to really embrace our laws and our ways of life and all of these sorts of things. So to have a workforce that has a very strong and, more importantly, an equal representation at all levels is critical, so that we don't continue to sort of allow the decisions that were made yesterday to be the decisions that guide us tomorrow, and that we can make sure that one of the great things about this country is how we champion equality, and that is at the forefront of a lot of our policy thinking, our settlement ideas, our language service provision and all of those different things.
I'll keep the next 8 minutes to my colleague before we finish.
Thank you. Minister, I'm going to come back to the aged crime prevention officers. I think in your earlier answer you said that 12 were now in place. I advised that that promise was actually for 56. It's a long way shy of the number that was promised. Why is it so far off the election commitment?
Well, as I said in my previous response, I look forward to continuing to work with the Commissioner to ensure seniors live happy, healthy, fulfilling lives. I will also work very closely with the Police Minister to continue this rollout. And unless Ms Smythe wants to add to that response. No.
So you don't actually have an explanation as to why the number is so far off what you're...
Well, the Minister for Police, I understand, has primary responsibility, but working in with DCJ, but I will work closely with the Minister for Police to continue the rollout. Regarding the particular numbers, I'll take this on notice and I'll report back.
Okay, thank you, Minister. On my turn now, just to Ms Smythe. Sorry, I've been calling you Ms Smith, but I now stand corrected. I wanted to ask about the design and place state environmental planning policy. Has your office had any involvement in providing a perspective in relation to the consultation on this proposed set?
There was a presentation provided to the New South Wales Ministerial Advisory Council on Ageing at their last meeting. So the council, as providing advice to the government, has been involved in some of that consultation.
Sorry, does that mean that your office was involved? You've received a presentation.
So the council, the advisory council, received a presentation and provided their thoughts back to regarding the SEP.
Right, and so where does it go from there in terms of the formal input from your office or the Minister's office in relation to the development of the SEP?
So it's not formal advice from the department, it was advice from the council. So no, my team haven't provided formal advice into the SEP.
Have any role in that? Minister, have you met with Coure?
I have met with peak bodies like Coure, for example, via Zoom, something that I do on a regular basis.
And did they raise with you the silver level living housing design standards?
They perhaps did, yeah, perhaps they did.
And what is your view on supporting that or otherwise?
In regards to that, just bear with me for 1 second. Well, in terms of the silver level means, obviously there are level pathway from road to the dwelling, as we know, at least one step less entrance on the ground floor and a ground floor toilet, reinforced walls around that toilet, shower and bath, etc. A large majority of the new social housing in New South Wales meets that silver level of livable housing design guides, and the government supports that.
So, Minister, given Ms Smythe's earlier answer about the input into the SEP, I don't really understand the connection between how your support for that proposal translates into feedback into a process like the one that's being undertaken to consult on a SEP that gives potentially is an opportunity to embody this silver level living housing design standard into law.
Whilst it's probably more... Sure. Whilst it probably is a question directed to our Minister for Planning, I will take that on notice and report back.
Okay. Can I ask about the ageing well strategy? Ms Smythe, does your unit have oversight of that strategy?
We do.
Yes. And so what's the status of the action plan for the first year of the strategy? Where is that up to?
So the action plan runs through 2021 and 2022. We haven't provided a formal progress report. We will do that at the end of 2022, but we regularly check in with agencies responsible for the actions under that plan. And just recently, it could even be March, might have been February, we met with the Interdepartmental Committee to discuss how that progress was occurring.
Have you developed the evaluation framework yet?
We have commenced developing some of that, but we haven't finalised, no.
Are you satisfied with the progress? It seems like the evaluation framework seems like a pretty fundamental, foundational step in terms of developing and implementing the strategy, so that you know what you're actually, how you're going to measure progress. Why is the progress on that so slow?
That is an action in the action plan for the first 2 years is to finalise that framework. So it will be completed at the completion of that action plan.
Minister, how much money has been allocated to the strategy?
Into the senior strategy 2021-2031, well, it is, as Ms Smythe has already answered, this is a 90-dot initiative, I think it's 88, sorry, 88-dot recommendation, which is, of course, delivered through agencies and government departments right across New South Wales. So working across government to deliver this strategy is what DCJ will be doing.
And how much has been allocated for this for this current budget year?
That's an operational matter. Maybe the director might be able to answer that, or the secretary of the department. But a lot of the recommendations are within their own remit, department remit.
So there's a recurrent budget of approximately $8.7 million, and that covers resources for the team and actions under the strategy. But as I mentioned before, funding for activities that sit outside of the seniors team do not pass through that budget.
And so, can I ask, am I out of time, or do I still have more time?
No, you've got some more time to finish off your questioning.
Okay, thank you. So, in terms of the role of your unit, Ms. Smythe, do you not track the budget spend for the strategy across the various activities?
When he finishes.
Obviously, the lead agencies are responsible for the implementation. I would expect that your unit has some responsibility in relation to tracking the spend for each of those programs that are part of the strategy. Not the case?
No, that's not the case. Many of those actions, so for example, within Focus Area 3, staying safe, active and healthy, for example, the New South Wales Ministry of Health is responsible for the majority of those actions, and that's part of the broader New South Wales health system. Older people are a priority for New South Wales Health and many of the programs they deliver, but some of those programs aren't specific to older people, so I don't think it's possible to pull apart that budget.
And does that mean that you don't have access to the spend for the previous strategy?
So we do in terms of that allocation for the senior strategy team and the implementation of actions related to that team.
I see, but not the actual programs that are incorporated in the strategy, the previous strategy.
I could take on notice to determine if the evaluation of the last strategy was able to quantify or estimate an amount of funding that was attributed to that strategy.
Okay. Minister, when will the 2022 midterm evaluation of the New South Wales Older People's Mental Health Services Service Plan be delivered?
That's an operational matter, but if I can turn to maybe the Director of Ageing.
So that isn't a service that is managed by my team. I understand that would be made a service New South Wales Health provide, and if it's an action under the strategy and in the current action plan, it would be due for completion at the end of 2022. Though some actions do cross multiple years, so not every single action will be totally finalised at the end of 2022. Some will continue.
Is your answer that this is a question best directed to someone else?
Correct.
Or to another portfolio?
Correct.
Right, I see. You may have answered this, but I'll just ask again, just in case. How many new projects have been delivered through the Aboriginal Housing Office Capital Works program that have specifically targeted Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people over 50?
We will take that question on notice, if that's okay, and more than happy to help.
Yeah, that's fine. What about staying active and active ageing programs? Can I ask about those? How have they been reintroduced with face-to-face components following the lifting of COVID restrictions?
So programs in general did pivot to online service provision, but more recently, many of those programs, including some of the programs funded under the Reducing Social Isolation in Seniors grant programs, are now able to go back to delivering face-to-face services.
So that's just a proportion of them that are delivering face-to-face services, is that correct?
I'd need to take it on notice for exactly how many, but the majority have indicated to us that they are now moving back to delivering those services in person.
Look, if you could take the details on notice and provide us perhaps a bit more of a detailed answer, that would be appreciated. Minister, has the Independent Review of Ageing and Disability Commissioner Act been tabled in the Parliament?
To my understanding, not yet. And that's the Director's, the Secretary of the Department's understanding as well.
When are you expecting to table?
Very soon.
And are you able to provide the details of which stakeholders have been consulted in relation to the review?
Well, it's all part of the review and we'll report back to this committee unless, of course, the Director or the Secretary of the Department wanted to add.
I am relatively new, and Minister, I would need to take that on notice.
And the Director.
There were, in terms of the Act review, last year there were some regulation changes that were specifically requested by the Commissioner. So that was just around allowing the Commission to exchange information with Commonwealth agencies such as Centrelink and the Department of Housing, the Commonwealth Department of Health, and as well as certain New South Wales government agencies, and also allows for registered nurses, speech pathologists to assist in the execution of search warrants under the Act. So some of those regulation changes that assisted the Commissioner in implementing his provisions under the Act have already been amended.
Because of your interest in this, we'll take that question on notice and provide you with a very detailed response.
Yep. That would be appreciated. Thank you, Minister. Minister, can I ask about strategies for preventing elder abuse amongst culturally and linguistically diverse communities? Can you elaborate on the types of strategies that are being deployed in relation to those communities?
I will take that on notice if I can. I did have material here. If it's okay with you, we'll take that on notice and report back.
Sure, that's fine. Can I ask about online banking in relation to... can I ask about how the government delivered help to seniors without access to online telephone banking and who had no access to funds when banks shut their doors during the COVID-19 lockdown?
Well, look,
strategy deployed there?
I'll throw to Ms Smythe in a second, but certainly this has been an issue raised to me, and you would have heard me on 2GB one morning a couple of weeks ago where this discussion had occurred. I'll throw to the Director in a second, but before I do, obviously, as you know, we're delivering a tech-savvy seniors program in partnership with Telstra, and that's been, of course, been operating since June 2012. July 2012, I do apologise. We're over 100,000 training places have been offered since this launch. It's through community colleges, libraries, local councils, and of course in recent years just under 10,000 of these seniors were placed. And of course through the training in over 12 languages, obviously it's been able to improve the digital literacy of seniors right across New South Wales. It is a really good program that, of course, we are continuing to support. And as I mentioned before, libraries, multicultural community groups, all of them, many of them are taking part in terms of this really good program. And as the restrictions easing, I should say, tech-savvy seniors courses have resumed both through college and library locations across the state with new social distancing standards in place. In terms of the nuts of your question, I might pass on to the Director of Ageing.
In regards to banking regulation, that's a Commonwealth responsibility, but we are aware that the Commonwealth Government has a regional banking task force, and it released an issues paper and held consultations at the end of 2021 regarding bank closures in regional areas of Australia. In addition to tech-savvy seniors, the Minister mentioned the 12 languages that program's available in. It's also available in Australian Sign Language through the Deaf Society of New South Wales in Parramatta, Wollongong, Gosford and Tweed Heads. And there's quite a few actions under the Ageing Well Action Plan regarding digital literacy. So TAFE New South Wales are providing literacy help for older people in terms of broader literacy skills in reading and writing, in addition to developing computer skills. There's also a specific digital literacy...
I just got there, Ms Smythe, because I don't think any of that really deals with the specifics of my question, which was about whether, and if the answer is the government didn't have any specific programs to address the issue, that's fine, but I mean, the question was about getting assistance to older residents who couldn't get access to money because the banks had closed and they didn't have the capacity to access banking online. So I might just perhaps draw you back to that specific question.
Look, if I can just add to that, and it's probably more a federal government responsibility, other than, of course, we've got a very successful tech-savvy program, which provides, as I said before, low-cost free training for older people who are interested in learning how to use this technology. But in my conversation 2 weeks ago with Richard Colbeck, I raised this as a concern in the community. We are seeing, and have for a very long time, unfortunately, banks are closing, being replaced by ATMs. This is something that I'm very, very mindful of, and it's certainly something that I will be, as I said in that interview on 2GB, writing to my federal counterpart.
Just, I suppose, on a sort of related point, I wanted to ask about the digital inclusion pilot program that I think was launched in 2021 and was running in Wagga Wagga, Taree and Cessnock. What's the status of this program?
A digital inclusion program aimed at keeping people connected, improving digital inclusion. The pilot involves Service New South Wales staff identifying customers with no or low digital literacy and offering them to connect with the existing programs that local communities have. I think that is a very wonderful project. Of course, the introduction of those courses to assist Aboriginal and older people as well, delivered by TAFE New South Wales. And I will turn to our Director of Ageing.
How many people utilise the project, Minister?
I'll turn. Yep. As I was mentioning before, I'll turn to our Director of Ageing, who will add to that response.
So the program's being implemented at the moment, and I don't have actual numbers of how many people have participated, but we can get that on notice.
Okay, and has there been an evaluation of the efficacy of this program?
I'll take that on notice.
It's an evaluation. If it hasn't been undertaken, can you provide also details of when the evaluation will be done?
Yeah, we can. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And is there any intention, Minister, in terms of rolling out this program beyond the pilot sites?
We'll certainly look at that and provide you with a detailed response. Okay, Minister, I think in an early answer you touched on the Communities Plus program. I'm advised that in 2019, the Minister for Social Housing, Brad Hazzard, said that over the next 10 years, development projects on land and housing corporation sites throughout New South Wales will be delivered through this program. Are you able to advise how many homes have been completed to date as part of the Communities Plus program across New South Wales? Yeah, look, that is a question that should be directed to the relevant minister. If it's okay with you, Mr. Chair, we'll take that on notice and report back to the committee.
Has the program ceased?
As I said, we'll take that on notice and I'll speak directly to the Minister for Families and Communities and Disability Services and report back to the committee.
Perhaps on notice you might also inquire as to why the Communities Plus website now sends visitors to an unrelated other website on its on page. So, Minister, perhaps you might take that one on notice as well, why that's the case. The link to Communities Plus website on Communities Justice page takes you to something that's not related to that program.
As you'd understand, that's an operational matter, and the Director of the Department, the Secretary of the Department, my mistake, is next to me, and he'll no doubt follow that through with the relevant department.
Are you able to provide, Minister, the numbers in terms of how many organisations applied for reducing social isolation for seniors grants?
I believe we've got that information here, and I turn to our Director of Ageing, who will be able to help you in more detail.
So in 2021-22, for round 2 of Reducing Social Isolation in Seniors Grant Program, 185 applications were received.
Right. Are you able to provide, I notice, the details of the organisations that applied for the grant? Just a list of who the applicants were?
Yep, we can do that, no problems.
And are you able to also provide details about whether, was this a budgeted program, Minister, or did the funds for this grant program come from some other source?
Obviously before my time, but we can
Yep, so it's
provide you with
an annual grant program for seniors, though when the pandemic hit, the guidelines were changed to ensure that the programs that were being funded related to reducing and combating social isolation in older people.
I think that's time.
Do you have any more questions? Anthony, do you have any more questions?
Pretty well. Any remaining questions that I have, I think we'll be able to put on the notice paper.
Okay, thank you very much. Government?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Minister, do you have anything you wish to raise or talk about in relation to today's hearing?
Well, look, can I just begin by thanking everyone's time today, including our Secretary of the Department, Director of Ageing, Mr Laposta and his staff, of course, my own staff who are behind me, and those working in Parliament, the Secretariat, and members of this committee. And of course, yourself, Mr Chair, you've done an outstanding job as Chair of this
I'm sure
budget.
you're right. I'm sure you're right.
Budget estimates. I wouldn't lie. But can I just add many of these questions? Certainly. Deserve detailed responses, and we'll provide budget estimates with those detailed responses. In addition to that, many of you have got my number, and certainly if there's anything that I can do, either in the multicultural space or in the senior space, please knock on my door, call me. You know where to locate me. Anthony, some very detailed questions there, and more than happy to help in any way I can. I didn't want to take too much time from the committee, but my very capable staff have just looked at my new website, markcoure.com.au. And the media release that Mr Waltz-Eckord was talking about is there. Unfortunately, I think he might have been clicking on an older link. As I said to the committee before, I have a new website. It's only been up and running for a week or two, maybe 3. So a lot of the content in the old website is migrating to the new website.
Thank you for the clarity, Minister.
Any more questions?
No more questions from the government.
All right. We'll draw the hearing to a full and complete close now. The opposition have no more questions. Crossbench has no more questions.
Just a quick point, Mr Chair, with your indulgence. Did any of the other witnesses have any responses that perhaps they don't require to take on notice? Save some time.
Yeah, I can help on a couple of things.
Yeah, please
just
do.
in this spirit of time. So, Mr Shoebridge asked the question around grant funding for Turbans for Australia, and I can provide clarity to say that Turbans for Australia have received 4 financial grants from Multicultural New South Wales in this year, $15,000 as part of the Stronger Together grant program for Turban Fest. $10,000 as part of the Stronger Together grant program, distributed in February, $29,700 as part of the Empowering and Supporting Local Communities grant program, which was administered paid in November 2021, and then another $5,000 as part of the Stronger Together grant program, which was approved and paid in September 2021. So that's 4 grant programs that organisation has received, and they do incredibly important work, but also very pleased to say that this government has spent over $60,000 with that organisation. And then the other one, to Mr Mossamane's question about our staffing, our ERE, Mr Mossamane was quite right. In the financial year of 2021, our agency had a staffing spend of $16.7 million as an actual, and this year in 21-22 we have a Treasury allocation of $19.18 million. So that's an increase of $3 million from the government investment into our agency for staffing, but I can't answer Mr Mossamane's future questions about what we will do in terms of our staffing.
Increasing staffing.
I hope he's right from my point of view and my agency's point of view.
And if I
All right, no
may,
more questions?
through the Minister, just qualify,
Statements? Okay.
not correct, but just add to an earlier response in relation to the Ageing and Disability Commission and the question of the staffing for that commission, the Commissioner being Robert Fitzgerald AM. What I would like to add is the staff whilst at establishment of the commission before Mr Fitzgerald were appointed by DCJ. All subsequent appointments and currently all staff are appointed by the Commissioner, managed by the Commissioner, and are performance managed by the Commissioner.
Any more clarifications? Any more discussion? Thank you very much for attending. All witnesses are released today. This is the end of the hearing. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mr.